Welcome, welcome. You're here at Eclipse Wizardry. Today we present to you, What If Astoria Kissed Harry at 7 and Ancient Greengrass Bloodline Chose Him Over Every Pureblood. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Boy with Sad Eyes. The Ministry of Magic's children's social functions were, by almost universal agreement among the children forced to attend them, the most boring events in the wizarding world. They happened twice a year, once in summer, once around Yule, and they existed for one reason that everyone understood and no one said aloud, so that pureblood families could look at each other's children and begin the long, careful process of deciding which ones might eventually be useful. Astoria Greengrass was 7 years old and had already figured this out. She sat on a velvet bench near the fountain in the ministry's enchanted reception hall, the one that normally housed the Fountain of Magical Brethren but had been cleared for the occasion and replaced with something more festive, a dancing water display that changed colors every few minutes, and she watched the adults move around each other like chess pieces and thought that it all looked very exhausting. "You're not mingling," said Daphne, appearing at her elbow. Daphne was 10, which she wore like a title of authority. "Neither are you," Astoria pointed out. "I was. I came back." Daphne smoothed her robes, deep green, greengrass colors, tailored precisely to suggest wealth without shouting it, and surveyed the room with the expression of someone conducting an inventory. "Mother's watching." Astoria glanced toward the cluster of women near the far wall, where their mother stood with Eugenia Parkinson and two women Astoria didn't recognize, all of them holding drinks and smiling at each other with their mouths. "Mother's always watching. So mingle." "I don't want to mingle with Blaze Zabini. He told me my dress was ordinary." "Your dress is ordinary. It's last season's cut." "I know that," Astoria said, with the dignity of someone who had already processed this information and moved on. "I don't need him to say it." Daphne made a sound that might have been a laugh and wandered back toward the Zabini boy, who was standing with his mother near the refreshment table looking like a small, well-dressed prince. Astoria watched her go and then returned to her primary occupation, which was watching the room. That was how she noticed the boy by the door. He was standing just inside the entrance to the hall, slightly apart from the group he'd arrived with, a large blonde woman, a large blonde man, and a very large blonde boy who was already heading purposefully toward the refreshments. The boy by the door wasn't blonde. He had dark hair that went in every direction at once, like it had opinions about gravity, and he was wearing robes that were clearly borrowed or handed down, the sleeves a little too long, the shoulders sitting slightly wrong. He was looking at the room the way Astoria sometimes looked at mathematics problems, like he was trying to find the correct first step and couldn't quite locate it. He didn't look like he wanted to be there. Most of the children didn't want to be there, but they'd been trained to hide it. This boy hadn't been trained to hide anything, which meant either that he was very new to this world or that no one had thought it worth the effort of teaching him. Astoria watched him for a moment. He was scanning the room, not with curiosity exactly, more with the careful attention of someone assessing exits. His eyes were very green behind round glasses that were slightly bent at one corner. Then the large blonde woman bent down and said something sharp near his ear, and the boy went very still in the particular way that people went still when they were trying to make themselves smaller. Astoria had seen that stillness before, in one of the kitchen cats at the Greengrass estate when her father's voice got loud. It was the stillness of something that had learned that being noticed was dangerous. She was off the bench before she'd made a decision about it. Her mother would say, later, that this was very typical of Astoria, acting before thinking, moving before reasoning had a chance to catch up. What her mother wouldn't know, what Astoria herself wouldn't understand until much later, was that in this particular moment it wasn't impulsiveness at all. It was something older than thought, something in her blood that had been waiting 7 years for exactly this moment and had simply recognized what it was looking at. She crossed the room. The boy didn't see her coming because he was still watching his relatives, tracking the large boy's progress toward the food with the expression of someone calculating something. Astoria stopped in front of him. "Your hair does that by itself?" she asked. He startled, turned, found her. Up close his eyes were really very green, and there was something at the center of them, behind the wariness, underneath the careful blankness, that was absolutely enormous. Like standing at the edge of something very deep and realizing the surface had been misleading you about the scale. "What?" he said. "Your hair. Does it do that by itself or do you make it do that?" He blinked. It does it. I can't make it do anything. I tried to make my hair go curly once," Astoria said conversationally. "I used one of the potions from Daphne's kit and it went orange instead." Mother was furious. She tilted her head. "I'm Astoria. Astoria Greengrass." Something moved across his face, a very brief recalibration, the kind she'd seen adults do when a name landed differently than expected. "I'm Harry," he said. "Harry Potter." Astoria absorbed this with great composure, because she had been raised to have composure, and also because she genuinely hadn't known who he was before and found that this didn't change her opinion very much. He still had interesting hair and sad eyes, and those seemed more relevant. "Do you want to go look at the fountain?" she said. "It turns purple around now, which is the best color." He looked over his shoulder at his relatives. The large blonde woman was now talking to another woman and had apparently forgotten he existed. The large boy was eating something. The large man was looking at a display case on the far wall with the expression of someone who had also been told to mingle and was finding the furniture more approachable than the people. "All right," Harry said. They walked to the fountain together, and Astoria pointed out that it did indeed turn purple, and Harry said it reminded him of the sky right before a storm, which Astoria thought was an unexpectedly good observation, and they talked about storms for a while and then about other things, a garden she liked at the estate, a book he'd read at school about Norse mythology which he said his teacher hadn't seen him take from the shelf because he'd been very careful, and the way that large things made small sounds when they were far away. He was, she decided, after about 15 minutes, interesting. Not because of his name or his scar, which she'd noticed but was trying not to stare at because staring was rude. Because he said things that other people didn't say. Because when she told him something he actually listened, not in the polite way the adults listened to each other, but in the way of someone who found information genuinely useful and was filing it carefully away. And because underneath the careful quietness of him there was something that felt like a banked fire. Not angry, not volatile, just very, very present. Like he was more there than most people. They had been talking for probably half an hour when the large blonde boy found them. He was carrying a plate of small cakes and wearing the expression of someone who had successfully conquered the refreshment table and was now looking for additional territory. "Harry," he said, not looking at Astoria at all. "Mother says you have to come back." "In a minute," Harry said. "Now." The large boy's eyes slid to Astoria with the flat assessment of someone who had been taught to identify bloodlines and was running the calculation. "Greengrass," he said, in the way one might say noted. "Dudley Dursley." "Hello," Astoria said. Dudley looked at the cakes, looked at Harry, and then said, with the confidence of someone who had never once been told the word no, "These are all mine." "I know," Harry said, with a patience so complete it was almost eerie. "I didn't ask for any." Dudley seemed faintly put out by this response, which was not the one he'd prepared for. He looked at Astoria again. "He's not allowed to have friends. Mother says he's..." What happened next, Astoria would spend years trying to describe accurately, and she never quite managed it. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't quite a feeling. It was more like the air in the space around Harry changed, the same way the air changed right before lightning struck, that sharp charged sense of something enormous deciding to move. Harry hadn't done anything visible. His expression hadn't even shifted. But Dudley stopped talking. He stopped talking and he took one step backward and then he found somewhere else to be with great urgency, the plate of cakes clutched to his chest, his large face gone an interesting color. Silence. Harry was looking at the fountain. His jaw was set. The green of his eyes had gone very dark. What did you do? Astoria said. Nothing, he said, but he was surprised that she'd noticed. She could tell because his head turned a fraction toward her and then stopped, like he'd thought better of it. He ran away. Dudley runs away from things, Harry said. It's one of his best qualities. Astoria looked at the space where Dudley had been and then looked at Harry, who was still watching the fountain. The purple had shifted to gold. She could feel something, very faintly, not like magic exactly, or not like any magic she'd encountered at lessons, which were mostly theoretical at her age. More like standing near a very old tree on a very windy day and understanding that the tree wasn't going anywhere. Harry, she said. Yeah? Can I tell you something? He looked at her then, properly, and the wariness in his eyes had done something complicated. It was still there, but there was something else with it now. Sure. I think you're going to be all right, she said. I don't know why, exactly. I just think you are. He was quiet for a moment. Long enough that she wondered if she'd said something wrong. Then something shifted in his face, small, almost invisible, like a door that had been bolted from the inside opening just a crack. Nobody's said that to me before, he said. Astoria thought about that. About what it meant to be 7 years old and to have nobody say something that simple. She thought about it and she felt something that her mother called the Greengrass temper but which was, in fact, just the inability to tolerate things that were wrong. Then she leaned forward and kissed him on the cheek. Quick, decisive, the way she did most things, there and done before anyone had a chance to object. Harry went completely still. Not the small animal stillness from before. A different kind. The kind of stillness that happened when something completely outside a person's experience reached them and they had no category to put it in. There, Astoria said. Now someone has. What neither of them saw, because neither of them was looking at the right thing, was what happened to the fountain. The water, which had been cycling through its colors on a regular rhythm, stopped. Every drop of it hung suspended for exactly 3 seconds, trembling. Then it resumed, but not in the sequence it had been following. It ran gold, then green, then gold again, the greengrass colors, over and over, until one of the ministry attendants noticed and went to check the enchantment and found that nothing was wrong with it, the spell was intact, it had simply decided to do something different. Nobody connected this to a 7-year-old girl and a boy by the fountain. Beneath the floor of the ministry's reception hall, if anyone had been looking, which no one was, something very old was waking up. Not with alarm. With something closer to satisfaction. Like a clock that had been waiting for someone to finally set it correctly. Harry felt it on the way home. He was in the back seat of Uncle Vernon's car, watching the city slide past the windows in the long summer evening, and he felt it in the way you felt a fever breaking, a release of pressure he hadn't known was there until it was gone. It started in his hands. A warmth, not unpleasant, like sunlight through glass. It moved up his arms and settled in his chest, and with it came a sense of space, like a room he'd been living in his whole life had suddenly had its walls pushed back by 30 feet in every direction. He pressed his hands flat against his thighs and breathed and thought, what is that? Vernon was complaining about something at the front of the car. Dudley was taking up 2/3 of the back seat eating a biscuit and occasionally looking at Harry with an expression Harry had never quite seen on his cousin's face before, which was a kind of flat, wide-eyed wariness. Like he was sitting next to something that might move unexpectedly. Harry looked at his own hands. There was nothing different about them. Same bony knuckles, same thin wrists, same ink stain on his left index finger from the fountain pen he'd found in a bin at school. But they felt different from the inside. They felt like they were his in a way they hadn't quite been before. He didn't understand it. He filed it carefully away under things that need more information and watched the city go by and thought about green eyes and a fountain turning gold and a girl who had told him he was going to be all right with the absolute conviction of someone announcing a fact. When they got home, he went straight to his cupboard under the stairs. He sat on his cot and he put his hand flat on the wooden wall beside him and very, very carefully, not even sure he was doing anything at all. He pushed with whatever it was that had shifted in his chest. The small crack in the wall beside the plumbing pipe, the one that had been there since he was 4 and had never gotten wider or narrower no matter what happened, sealed. Smooth. Like it had always been smooth. Harry stared at it for a very long time. Then he lay down, and for the first time in years, he slept without listening for footsteps. The dreams started that night. Not nightmares, he had enough of those, had always had them, the green light and the high cold laugh and the sensation of falling into something he couldn't see. These were different. These were deep. More like memories than dreams, except they weren't his memories. A woman with dark hair standing in a courtyard, drawing a circle in the air with her wand, speaking words in a language that Harry didn't know but somehow understood, a binding, a great coiling thing of gold and green that wove itself through the ground and the stone and the very air of a place and then went quiet, waiting, a voice saying, in a register that wasn't sound but something older, when the right one comes, you will know him, and when you know him, you will have already chosen. He woke up in the gray early light with the dream fading and the warmth still in his chest and something else, new, a direction. Not literal, he didn't know where it pointed on a map. But a sense of orientation, the way you could be in a dark room and still know which wall the door was in. He was pointed toward something. Something had decided he was worth pointing toward it. He was 7 years old and he had no framework for this and he thought about it very carefully all through breakfast while Vernon read the paper and Petunia made Dudley's eggs and no one spoke to him, and he decided that he could be afraid of it or he could be interested in it. He had had plenty of things to be afraid of. This one didn't feel like something to be afraid of. It felt like something that had been waiting. He decided to be interested. The change was not subtle, from Vernon and Petunia's perspective. It started small. 2 days after the ministry event, Vernon told Harry to weed the garden and Harry went out and weeded it, which was normal. What wasn't normal was that when Vernon came out an hour later to inspect, to find fault with, which was the real purpose, every weed was out, the beds were clean, and the border that had been dying for 3 years along the back fence was, inexplicably, in full and vigorous bloom. Vernon stared at it for a long time. "Boy," he said. "Yes?" Harry said, from where he was putting the gardening tools away. "How did you, the border, I liked the look of it," Harry said, pleasantly, "so I helped it along." Vernon turned very red. Then he went inside. A week after that, Dudley cornered Harry in the kitchen with 2 of his friends from school and told him in great detail about what they were going to do to him in the alley behind the house, a ritual of violence that had been refined over 3 years and which Dudley described with something approaching pride. Harry listened to the entire thing. Then he said, "Dudley," in a tone of voice that made all 3 boys suddenly look at him in a new way, uncertain. "What?" Dudley said, but quieter. "I don't think you're going to do any of that," Harry said. He said it the way he might say "I think it's going to rain today," not threatening, not angry, just a statement of things as they were. The 3 boys looked at each other. Then they left the kitchen. Dudley didn't corner him again that summer. The truly alarming event, from Petunia's perspective, happened at the end of August. She came into the kitchen at 6 in the morning to find Harry sitting at the table with a book open in front of him and the tea already made and everything very calm. This was unusual enough. What made her stop in the doorway was that the book he was reading was one she recognized, a thin volume with a faded green cover that had been in the back of Vernon's desk drawer since she'd found it among Lily's things after the funeral and put it there deliberately in a place it couldn't be seen or found. A book about magical families. About bloodlines. About Hogwarts. Harry looked up. His eyes, she had always hated his eyes, too green, too clear, too much of Lily in them, were calm and direct in a way they hadn't been before, a way that made her feel, absurdly, that she was being assessed. "I go to Hogwarts next year," he said. Not a question. She should have denied it. She should have taken the book. She should have done 20 things she didn't do, because something in the way he said it, not aggressively, not with accusation, just with a quiet certainty that suggested he was simply catching up on information he'd been entitled to all along, made all of those responses feel smaller than she was. Like trying to put a gate on a river. Yes, she said instead, and heard herself say it with something between fury and relief. Good, Harry said, and turned back to his book. She went upstairs and sat on the bed and held her own hands together very tightly and tried not to think about the last time she'd seen her sister, and the look on Lily's face in the second before she'd said something Petunia had never repeated to anyone and had spent 12 years burying. "He'll be something extraordinary," Lily had said, looking at Harry asleep in his crib. "I can feel it. He'll be something we don't have a word for yet." Petunia sat upstairs for a long time. Then she went back down and made breakfast and said nothing, and the careful, unspoken arrangement between herself and the boy settled into a new shape, not warmth, nothing so large as that, but a mutual recognition. He knew. She knew he knew. He wasn't going to make a scene about it, and she was not going to pretend. It wasn't kindness, but it was something. 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days after the ministry function, in a house in Wiltshire with 15 rooms and a library that occupied most of the east wing, Astoria Greengrass sat down to breakfast and found her elder daughter already there, eating toast with the focused efficiency of someone who had somewhere to be. "Astoria is having the dream again," Daphne said, without looking up from her plate. Astoria set down her tea. "How do you know?" "She told me. She said it's getting stronger." Daphne turned a page of the Witch's Social Gazette she was reading. The one with the gold and green. The binding. Astoria was quiet for a moment. She had married into the Greengrass name, but she had been researching it for 23 years and she knew, better than most people knew, better perhaps than anyone outside the family, what the compact was and what it meant when it started calling to a bloodline member. "It activated," she said. "Not a question." "Apparently." Daphne finally looked up, and her expression was the one she wore when she had formed an opinion and was deciding whether it was worth the trouble of saying. 3 years ago. She won't tell me when or where. "The ministry function," Astoria said. Daphne blinked, recalibrating. "How did you?" "Because I was watching and she disappeared for 40 minutes and came back looking like she'd solved a problem." Astoria picked her tea back up. "I thought it was the Zabini boy. He can be charming when he applies himself." "It wasn't Blaise Zabini," Daphne said, with a certainty that suggested this had been ruled out comprehensively. "No." Astoria looked at the window. The Wiltshire morning was grey and soft, mist lying in the low field behind the garden wall. "You should begin your research. Into who she kissed. Into who the compact chose." Daphne considered this. The compact, she had always understood, was not a small thing. It was the oldest working magic the Greengrass family possessed, older than the house, older than the name in its current form, reaching back to a matriarch who had built it into the family blood in the years after the founders, when magical Britain was still a loose collection of houses perpetually at each other's throats and survival required the wisdom to recognize strength and attach to it early. The compact chose. The Greengrass blood was a passenger, and whoever the blood deemed worthy got, what, exactly? Protection. Resources. The active investment of one of the oldest magical families in Britain, through a mechanism that couldn't be bought or politically maneuvered or strategically arranged. It had to be genuine. The act that triggered it had to be genuine. Astoria, at 7 years old, had apparently looked at someone and felt something genuine enough to wake up a 300-year-old magical contract. "I'll research," Daphne said. "Though I suspect I already know." Astoria looked at her. "He went to a ministry children's event with the Dursleys," Daphne said. "Who else in our world is being raised by muggles with that particular kind of badly fitting robe?" They looked at each other. "Harry Potter," Astoria said softly. "Harry Potter," Daphne confirmed, and something in her voice was complicated, not surprised, because Daphne worked very hard to never be surprised by anything, but recalibrated. Like a very careful architectural plan that had just had a new and very large load-bearing wall added to it. Astoria, at this moment, was in the East Wing library pulling every book she could find about the compact off the shelves. She'd been doing this for 3 years, since the morning after the ministry function when she'd woken up from the first golden green dream and understood with the instinctive clarity of a child who hadn't yet learned to talk herself out of things that something important had happened. She'd been 8, then 9, and now she was 10 and Hogwarts was on the horizon, and the direction in her blood had gotten louder since the summer started. Not louder like noise, more like a signal getting stronger as the distance closed. She found what she was looking for on the third shelf from the top, a thin volume bound in dark green leather with the Greengrass family crest on the cover. The Accord, a history of the compact and its properties. She'd read it 4 times. She read it again now, slowly, paying particular attention to the section on the chosen, on who they tended to be, on what the blood was looking for. The compact does not choose by blood, the old text read, in the cramped handwriting of someone writing for posterity and aware they were probably doing a bad job of it. It chooses by what might be called weight, the particular magical gravity of a person whose power is fundamental rather than trained, whose character has been shaped by difficulty rather than comfort, and who carries within them a potential that, fully realized, would reshape their world. The compact's instinct is not charitable. It does not choose good people because they are good. It chooses powerful people because their power is genuine, and then it relies on the Greengrass who activated it to attend to the matter of character. Astoria read that last sentence twice. It relies on the Greengrass who activated it to attend to the matter of character. She closed the book and looked out the library window at the grey Wiltshire morning and thought about a boy by a fountain with sad eyes and dark hair that went in every direction and the particular quality of his stillness and the thing she'd felt when she kissed his cheek, which had been, in retrospect, in the language of a 10-year-old who'd spent 3 years looking for the right word, like touching something that was very, very alive. She wasn't afraid of the responsibility. That surprised her a little, but it was true. She wasn't afraid of it at all. She was, if she was being precise about it, looking forward to it. The letter arrived at Privet Drive on Harry's birthday, which was the 30th of July. Not the Hogwarts letter, that was still a week away. This one came by a large owl Harry didn't recognize, dark brown with golden flecks in its feathers and a look of tremendous professional dignity. It landed on the kitchen windowsill at breakfast, waited with obvious patience while Harry stared at it, and then held out its leg with the air of something completing a task it had been given and intended to complete correctly. The letter was written on paper that felt different from normal paper, somehow, older, or heavier, or both. The handwriting was precise and slightly formal, the hand of someone who had been taught penmanship seriously. Dear Mr. Potter, you don't know me, but I believe we have met, though you may not remember it. My name is Daphne Greengrass, and I am writing on behalf of my family to formally acknowledge the compact that now exists between the House of Greengrass and yourself. I understand this may require some explanation. I have included a copy of the relevant pages from our family's historical record. I would encourage you to read them carefully. The short version is this: the Greengrass family owes you a debt that is not a debt, a protection that is not charity, and a relationship that was not chosen by either of us but that is, under our family's oldest law, as binding as any magical contract in Britain. I have been asked by my mother to make contact and to establish communication before you begin at Hogwarts. I should tell you that I was skeptical of this. I am still somewhat skeptical, though I have been told that my skepticism is entirely irrelevant to the compact's function, which is correct. If you have questions, and I imagine you have many, you may write back via the owl, whose name is Heloise and who will know where to find you. Regards, Daphne Greengrass. P.S. My sister asked me to tell you that the fountain turned purple that evening, which she says you'll understand. I have no idea what this means. Harry read the letter 3 times. Then he read the included pages, which were dense and old-fashioned in their language but which communicated their meaning clearly enough. Something that had been sleeping in a family he'd never heard of had woken up when a girl at a ministry party had kissed him on the cheek, and now he was, by the oldest law of magical Britain, under the protection and active interest of one of the oldest houses in the country. He thought about that for a while, eating toast, while the owl named Heloise watched him with professional patience. Then he thought about the girl, Astoria, Daphne's sister, and the fountain, and what she'd said. "I think you're going to be all right." Something settled in his chest. Not the fire this time, something quieter, more permanent. Like a foundation. He wrote back. "Dear Daphne Greengrass, I do remember your sister. She told me the fountain turned purple and I agreed with her. I still agree with her. I've read the pages you included. I have questions, but I think some of them might need to be asked in person, which seems like it might be easier after Hogwarts starts. I should tell you that I'm not very easy to manage, if that's what your mother is hoping for. And I don't need protection from charity. But I'm willing to hear what you have to say. Regards, Harry Potter P.S. Tell Astoria thank you. I mean that properly." Heloise the owl took the letter with great dignity and left through the still open window, and Harry watched her go and felt the warmth in his chest pulse once, like something confirming a message received. He had 1 week until his Hogwarts letter arrived. He spent it reading everything he could get his hands on, not just the magical family book, but a second one he'd found tucked behind it that turned out to be a survey of wizarding Britain from the 1800s, and a slim pamphlet about Hogwarts that someone had left in a library book about a decade ago, creased and annotated in a handwriting he didn't recognize. He also spent time in the garden, pushing things. Not carelessly, he was careful, always, about not attracting Vernon's attention. But he tested the edge of what he could do. He found he could move things without touching them, small things, and not large distances, but consistently. He found he could make light, a pale steady glow in the cup of his palm, and sustain it for minutes. He found that when he tried to make something happen and it didn't work, it was never because the power wasn't there. It was always about direction, about getting the request to the right place inside himself. He thought about that carefully. He decided it was like swimming in a direction you could feel but not see. You didn't need to see it to go there. You just needed to stop swimming against it. On the 5th of August, the Hogwarts letter arrived, and with it a list of supplies, and Vernon's face when Harry showed it to him went through 7 distinct shades of red before settling on a kind of exhausted purple resignation. Harry watched this with patience and zero sympathy. "We'll need to go to London," Harry said. "To Diagon Alley." "We are not, we'll need to go to London," Harry said again, in exactly the same tone, without raising his voice at all, and Vernon looked at him properly, perhaps for the first time, or the first time in a while, and something in Vernon deflated. "Fine," Vernon said, through his teeth. "London. Tomorrow." That night, in his cupboard, which had been reorganized at some point without explicit permission into something that functioned like an actual small room, the crack in the wall still smooth, the single light bulb augmented by the small warm glow he kept in the corner near his books, Harry lay on his back and looked at the low ceiling and felt the direction in his chest and thought about a girl with good posture and direct eyes and a voice that said you're going to be all right, like it was just true, like it was just a fact about the world that she happened to know. He thought, "I'm going to Hogwarts in a month." He thought, everything is about to be different. He wasn't afraid. He'd tried to find the fear of it and it wasn't there. What was there instead was something clear and certain and very, very patient, waiting for the starting gun. He thought about Voldemort too, because he wasn't naive and the old texts he'd been reading were not shy about history. He thought about what the compact pages had said about weight and gravity and power shaped by difficulty. He thought about a high cold laugh and green light and the way the warmth in his chest felt like the opposite of that, like the photographic negative of something terrible. He turned to face the wall, where the crack had been. He'd sealed it himself. He didn't know the right words, hadn't had the right tools. He'd just asked the power inside him to do the job and it had done it. He closed his eyes. He thought, "I know you're out there. I know you're coming back." He thought, very clearly, in the direction of nothing in particular, in the direction of the future, I'll be ready. The light in the corner of his cupboard pulsed once, warm and steady, and held. Chapter 2, Letters and Lions. The Hogwarts Express left at 11. Harry knew this because he'd read it 3 times in the letter, and then again in the pamphlet, and then confirmed it with Daphne's second letter, which had arrived the week before school and contained, in the same precise, slightly formal handwriting, a condensed guide to wizarding social dynamics that was so unsentimental in its honesty Harry had immediately liked her more. Slytherin will assess you on sight and make a determination, she'd written. Gryffindor will embrace you and ask questions later. Ravenclaw will want to know what you know. Hufflepuff will want to know who you are. Of these, Hufflepuff's approach is arguably the most accurate, though don't tell anyone I said so. He'd written back, which house are you in? And she'd replied, Slytherin. Obviously. He found platform 9 3/4 by himself, because the Dursleys had deposited him at King's Cross with his trunk and his owl, Hedwig, snowy white and already operating at a level of dignity that suggested she considered herself his better, and left without ceremony. Harry had watched their car pull away and felt nothing in particular, then found a trolley and went looking for a brick wall that wanted him to walk through it. He found it by feel, which he was beginning to think was how he found most things. The same sense of direction that the warmth in his chest gave him, a pull, like a compass needle. He walked at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 at a steady pace without checking if anyone was watching, and the wall wasn't there, and then he was through. The train was enormous and red and breathing steam in long slow exhalations like something alive and patient. The platform was chaos, trunks, owls, cats, families, red scarves and green ones, children running, parents calling, someone near the front of the train arguing with a large man in a moleskin coat about the state of a cauldron. Harry stood at the edge of it for a moment and felt the warmth in his chest adjust, the way it always did when he moved to a new place, like a compass needle settling. Then he picked up Hedwig's cage and pulled his trunk toward the train and got on. He found a compartment near the middle that was empty, stowed his trunk, and sat with Hedwig's cage on the seat beside him and watched the platform through the window. He watched families say goodbye. He watched a red-haired woman with 7 children distributed around her like satellites work the platform with the focused competence of someone who had done this many times and was still doing it with love, which he found he couldn't look at for very long. The compartment door opened and a boy with red hair and something on his nose that might have been dirt looked in. He had a friendly, open face and the particular energy of someone who was very eager for things to start. Anyone sitting here? Everywhere else is full. No, Harry said. Come in. The boy dragged in a trunk, dropped onto the opposite seat, and stuck out his hand. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter. Ron Weasley's eyes went immediately to the scar, which Harry was used to, and then Ron did something that elevated him immediately in Harry's estimation. He yanked his eyes back up to Harry's face with visible effort and said, Right, sorry, I wasn't going to. Fred and George said I should ask about it but I'm not going to. Thanks, Harry said, and meant it. Is it real? The whole thing? You know who and everything? I don't remember it, Harry said, but yeah, it's real. He's real. Ron nodded with great seriousness. Our lot have always said so. Dad says people are too scared to say his name. He paused. Are you? No, Harry said. Voldemort, Ron said experimentally, and then made a face like he'd stepped on something unexpected. Ugh. Doesn't get easier. You did it though, Harry said. Ron grinned, sudden and wide, and that was how Harry Potter acquired his first friend, somewhere between London and Scotland, over a pile of chocolate frogs that Ron produced from his pockets with the generosity of someone who had been raised in a house where everything was shared by default. The compartment door opened a second time about an hour later. This time it was a girl with a great deal of brown hair and an immediate, focused quality to her attention. She looked at everything as if she was going to be tested on it. Have you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost his. No toad, Ron said. The girl's eyes went to Harry. Recognition, recalibration, the same beat he'd seen in Ron, and then she did something slightly different. She sat down on the edge of the seat and said, "I'm Hermione Granger. I've read about you." "Lot of that going around," Harry said. "The books aren't very accurate," she said. "I mean, some of them are. Hogwarts, a history is mostly reliable. But the ones about you specifically are mostly," she paused, searching for the charitable word, "speculative." "Everything about me is speculative," Harry said. "I didn't write any of them." "Have you read them?" "A few. They were wrong about most of it." Hermione absorbed this with visible interest. "Which bits?" "Everything about the Dursleys, for a start." She looked like she had 47 follow-up questions and was being very disciplined about not asking all of them at once. Harry liked her immediately for the restraint. She stayed in the compartment and they talked. She was extraordinarily well-read, had apparently read every Hogwarts textbook already, and had opinions about all of them, many of which were correct. Ron ate chocolate frogs and contributed observations at intervals and disagreed with her about the historical significance of the 1637 Werewolf Code in a way that was clearly not the first time they'd found a disagreement and didn't intend to be the last. Harry watched them both and felt the train carry him north and thought, this is what it's supposed to be like. Not just magic. Not just power. This. They found Neville's toad. It was under a seat 3 compartments down, deeply unbothered, and Neville Longbottom followed it back to Harry's compartment and stayed, mostly because no one told him not to, and he seemed to find the company of 3 other people who weren't commenting on the toad situation restful. He was round-faced and nervous and kept apologizing for things that didn't require apology, but he had a stillness underneath the anxiety that Harry recognized as belonging to someone who'd had to develop it the hard way. He didn't mention Harry's scar either. "My gran says you're a hero," Neville said, at some point between the Midlands and the border. "Your gran is kind," Harry said. "She says it as a fact, not a kindness. Gran doesn't really do kindness. She does accuracy." Harry looked at him. "What do you think?" Neville seemed surprised to be asked. I think you were a baby. I think anyone would have been scared. I think it's strange that everyone's expecting things from someone who was only a year old when it happened." He paused. "Is that rude?" "It's the most sensible thing anyone said to me about it," Harry said. Neville went slightly pink with pleasure and fed Trevor the toad a bit of chocolate and asked no more questions about scars or legends, and Harry found a 4th friend before the train had crossed into Scotland. The compartment door opened a 3rd time, this time without knocking, which was the first signal, and Draco Malfoy walked in. Harry had read about the Malfoys. Daphne's letter had included a section on prominent pureblood families that was dry and informative and had not attempted to editorialize, which meant the information had been more useful than the editorializing would have been. He'd also found the Malfoys in the Survey of Wizarding Britain, mentioned 3 times, once in the context of Voldemort's inner circle, once in the context of a very large ministry donation in 1981 that had smoothed over some uncomfortable questions, and once as holders of the 4th oldest land title in magical England. The boy standing in the compartment doorway had his father's face in miniature and the absolute certainty of someone who had never walked into a room expecting to be anything other than its most important occupant. "Harry Potter," Draco said, with the satisfied air of someone finding what they went looking for. His 2 large companions, Crabbe and Goyle, who Hermione had identified earlier and with some contempt, flanked him in the corridor. "Yes?" Harry said. Draco stepped in, looked around at the others with a visible assessment that dismissed Ron in 1 beat, Hermione in half a beat, and gave Neville about a quarter. He looked back at Harry. "I wanted to introduce myself. Draco Malfoy." The name landed like he expected it to mean something. "I know who you are," Harry said. "Your father donated 40,000 galleons to the ministry in 1981. The historical record notes it as one of the largest single donations in a century." Draco blinked. That wasn't the response he'd been prepared for. "My father is very generous," he said, slightly careful now. He is, Harry agreed. The timing was interesting. He said it completely neutrally, the way you stated a weather observation. The timing, 2 months after Voldemort's fall, when a number of people with uncomfortable loyalties were suddenly finding reasons to express their civic commitment financially, was very interesting indeed, but Harry didn't say the second part. He didn't need to. He watched it land in Draco's eyes and watched Draco recalibrate, and did it all without changing expression. Anyway, Draco said, recovering. You should know that not everyone in our world is worth knowing. I can help you with that. He glanced at Ron again. Some families, Ron, Harry said. What's your father do at the ministry? Misuse of Muggle artifacts, Ron said, watching Draco with narrowed eyes. Your family's been at the ministry for how many generations? Harry asked. 4, Ron said. 5 if you count my great-uncle, who was in the floor regulation panel in 1890-something. Right, Harry said, and looked back at Draco. He comes from a family with 5 generations of ministry service. Hermione's the best-read person on this train. Neville's grandmother is Augusta Longbottom, which means his family has been significant in Wizarding Britain since before the Statute of Secrecy. He paused. I'm not sure what your assessment criteria are, but those seem like they might meet most people's bar. Draco stared at him. His jaw was tight. I know what you're doing, Draco said, quietly, dropping the social performance. His voice had gone flat and a little cold, and in a strange way Harry found this more interesting than the performance had been. You're already choosing sides. I'm not choosing sides, Harry said. I'm just not letting you choose them for me. The two boys looked at each other for a moment. Draco's eyes were gray and sharp, and behind them, Harry could see the shape of something that wasn't quite anger, something more complicated, more personal. A boy who had been told his whole life what he was inheriting and had arrived on this train expecting to find it exactly where he'd been promised it would be. We'll see, Draco said, and left. His flankers followed, closing the compartment door behind them. Wow, Ron said, into the silence. He's going to be a problem, Hermione said. He's going to try, Harry said. He picked up a chocolate frog. It's fine. He didn't say the other part, the part he was actually thinking, which was, Draco Malfoy is going to be a problem not because he's cruel but because he's smart and he's been told something that isn't true and he's going to spend years finding out it isn't true, and that process is going to be ugly. He filed that under things to watch. The boats across the Black Lake went quietly, and the castle rose out of the dark like something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for the angle to see it from. Harry looked up at it from the bow of the boat and felt the warmth in his chest bloom outward like a held breath released. He heard Ron say something beside him. He heard Hermione say something back. He didn't quite catch the words because the castle was doing something to his attention that he couldn't explain, like a key finding a lock, like something recognizing something. The water reflected the lights from the windows and the warmth in his chest said, Here. Here. This is it. He thought, home. He thought it once, clearly, and then he let it settle and didn't examine it, because some things you damaged by looking too hard at them. The great hall was bigger than he'd imagined from any description. The ceiling was the night sky and the candles floated and the 4 long tables stretched away into the distance and hundreds of faces turned toward the door when the first years walked in. Harry felt the wave of recognition move through the room like a stone dropped in still water, the turning heads, the elbowing, the murmur, and he walked through it at the same pace he'd been walking, not acknowledging it, not performing indifference either. Just moving. He listened to Dumbledore greet them. He watched the Sorting Hat, which was genuinely unnerving up close, a living piece of old magic with a crumpled crown and a slash of a mouth. He watched it put a girl named Hannah Abbott in Hufflepuff and a boy named Brocklehurst somewhere he didn't catch, and then Hermione, who went to Gryffindor with an audible whoosh of relief, and Neville after a pause longer than most, and then it was his name being called and the room doing that wave again, louder this time. He sat on the stool. The hat dropped over his eyes. Interesting, it said, directly into his head, in a voice like old leather and older magic. "I've been told that before," Harry thought back. "Not like this, you haven't. I've been doing this for 1,000 years and I've had perhaps a dozen minds like yours. Do you know what they have in common? Tell me. They all left a mark on this school. On this world. Usually considerably more than they intended." A pause. "You're already awake, aren't you? Something opened you up." "Something did," Harry agreed. "Yes. And you've got the kind of bravery that's different from courage. It's not that you're not afraid of things, it's that you consider fear beside the point. Very Gryffindor. But you've got the strategy, the patience. You could be extraordinary in Slytherin." "I know," Harry said. "But I don't want to win by playing the game they built. I want to change what the game is." The hat was quiet for a beat. Then, with something that might have been warmth, "Now that's Gryffindor. Better be, Gryffindor." The table on the far left erupted. Harry took the hat off and handed it back to Professor McGonagall, whose expression was complicated, and walked to the Gryffindor table where people were making room and someone was already trying to shake his hand, and he sat down between Ron and Hermione and felt the warmth in his chest settle like something taking up its proper position. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, he found Draco Malfoy's eyes on him. Grey and cold and calculating. Harry met them for a moment and then looked away, not dismissively, just finished with the moment. The first week at Hogwarts was a process of calibration. Harry had spent the summer reading the textbooks, so the academic content wasn't surprising, but magic in theory and magic in practice were different countries with a common language. He found charms natural in the way that breathing was natural. He pointed his wand and said the words and felt the connection between intention and result go straight through, no gap. Professor Flitwick watched him levitate his feather on the first attempt on the first day and wrote something down and then watched him again, which Harry noted. Transfiguration was more demanding. It required not just the direction but the specific shape, the precise model in your mind of what you wanted. McGonagall's match became a needle on his third try, which wasn't first but was among the first, and it was the completeness of the transformation that made McGonagall pause. No trace of match left in the needle, perfect eye, perfect point, perfect steel. She held it up and looked at it and then looked at Harry and said, "Satisfactory, Mr. Potter," in a voice that was doing a great deal of work to stay level. Potions was Snape. Harry had done some reading about Severus Snape too. Daphne's letter had included a note that said simply, "Potions." Snape. "He was my godfather's schoolyard enemy and has had a complicated relationship with your name since before you were born. He is, I'm told, an exceptional potionist, a competent occlumens, and constitutionally incapable of being impartial about Gryffindors. You'll need to decide how to handle that." He'd appreciated the directness. Snape entered his own classroom the way he entered every space, apparently, which was with a theatrical use of the room's acoustics and a gaze that inventoried everyone in it and found them wanting before they'd done anything. He took roll call. He got to Harry's name and paused for exactly one extra beat, just long enough for everyone to notice, and then looked up. "Ah, yes," he said. "Harry Potter. Our new celebrity." The class was very quiet in the way classrooms went quiet when something was about to happen. "Tell me, Mr. Potter," Snape said, with a silky precision that had probably reduced lesser people to rubble, "what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry had read 1,000 magical herbs and fungi. He'd read it because Daphne had suggested it and he'd learned to trust Daphne's suggestions without necessarily understanding the immediate application. He'd also read magical drafts and potions, where the combination in question appeared in Chapter 7. "Draught of Living Death," Harry said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known." The name's a bit dramatic but the effect is accurate. A pause. Snape's expression didn't change. "Where would you look if I told you to find me a Bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat. It's a calcified mass, works as an antidote against most poisons, which is why you keep one in every potions cabinet as a baseline precaution. Another pause. Snape moved on. Harry watched him as the lesson progressed and thought, he wanted me to fail that. He built that whole entrance and those questions around expecting a specific kind of failure, the famous boy who doesn't know anything, who coasts on his name. He thought, he's going to have to find a different strategy. He was careful after that. He brewed the assigned potion correctly on the first attempt, quietly, without showing off, and helped Ron with the cutting rhythm for his boomslang's skin without being obvious about it. When Snape came by to inspect and found both their potions correct, the slight tightening around his eyes was the only sign that this was not the expected outcome. After class, in the corridor, Ron shook his head. He hates you. He expected me to be a certain thing, Harry said. He'll adjust. Will he? Probably not, Harry admitted. But that's his problem. Hermione found him in the library on the 6th day, which surprised him not at all. She was the kind of person who took inventory of the library within the first week as a matter of basic orientation. What surprised him was that she sat down across from him and didn't say anything for a few minutes, just read, and he understood that she wasn't there for conversation but for company, and he found that he didn't mind this at all. After a while she said, without looking up, "You already knew all of it. The potion's material. The charms theory. The transfiguration principles." "I read ahead," Harry said. "I read ahead too. I didn't know all of it." "What are you reading now?" he asked. "The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 2. She said it without embarrassment, which he liked. "Getting ahead. Any good?" Chapter 4 on hover charms is actually better than the Grade 1 version of the same material. The explanation of wand angle is more precise. He looked at what he was reading, which was a history of magic by Bathilda Bagshot, the actual history rather than the textbook version. He'd found it in the restricted section of the shelves marked older editions. He turned it so she could see the spine. Her eyes went bright with the particular illumination of someone encountering a book they'd wanted to read. "Is that good?" "The chapter on the Founders is better than Hogwarts, a history's version. More honest about the conflict." She reached across the table with a look that was half question, half already reaching. He slid it toward her. She read the relevant chapter with total focus for 20 minutes and then slid it back and said, "Slytherin's actual grievance wasn't really about blood purity at first, was it? It was about succession and control of the school's governance." "That's my reading of it," Harry said. "The blood purity thing came after. As a justification for the power structure he'd already decided he wanted." "That's how it usually works," Harry said. She looked at him with the expression of someone making a reassessment. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Most of the book said you'd be." "Don't tell me what the book said I'd be," Harry said. "I don't want to know." "Fair enough." She went back to her Grade 2 book. "I think we're going to be good friends," she added, matter-of-factly. "I think so too," Harry said, and turned a page. The letter from Daphne arrived in the second week, via Heloise, who had apparently been making the journey between Hogwarts and Wiltshire on a regular schedule and had clearly decided to add this to her professional responsibilities without anyone asking her to. "Harry, Mother has been in contact with Gringotts regarding the terms of the compact. It is more extensive than our family's records suggested. The short version, Gringotts recognizes it as a binding instrument, which means certain protections and resources are now legally available to you through the House of Greengrass. I will explain in more detail at Yule if you're willing to meet. My sister also asks that I remind you, and I am passing this on with the complete neutrality of someone who did not ask to be a messenger, that she told you so about the fountain. Practically, watch out for Quirrell. His occlumency is poor and he's hiding something. I noticed it at the start of term feast and I thought you should know. Also, the Philosopher's Stone is at Hogwarts. Dumbledore moved it in August. I don't know where. But it's there and several parties would like it and you should be aware. Harry read this twice and then looked across the Gryffindor table to where Quirrell was eating his breakfast with the particular careful attention of someone very focused on appearing relaxed. He'd noticed the stutter on the first day. He'd noticed it was inconsistent, stronger in some contexts than others, absent entirely for 2 seconds when Quirrell turned to deal with a spill and thought no one was watching. He'd noticed the smell, something underneath the garlic and the dust, something cold and dark like deep water in a place without light. He filed Quirrell under active concern and wrote back to Daphne, "I noticed Quirrell on day 1. You're right about his occlumency. I'll be careful. Tell me about the stone when I see you at Yule. I'd rather discuss in person. Also tell Astoria the fountain is the best part of the story." He found the mirror in November. He hadn't gone looking for it. He'd been exploring the castle in the way he explored everything, methodically and without urgency, mapping it the way you mapped any terrain that was going to be relevant to you. He'd found the room off the 3rd floor corridor by following the warmth in his chest, which occasionally pointed toward things it wanted him to see. The mirror of Eriste stood in the empty room like it had been waiting for exactly him, which, in a sense, it had. He stood in front of it and looked at what it showed him and didn't move for a long time. Not just his parents. He'd expected his parents and there they were, a woman with red hair and green eyes who looked at him with an expression he had no word for, and a man with dark hair and glasses and a slight curve at the corner of his mouth that Harry recognized because he'd seen it in his own reflection. But behind them, around them, there was more. There was a shape he almost recognized, a feeling of fullness, the sense of a room with a fire and voices and someone arguing in the next room about something that didn't matter and laughter, the kind of laughter that had nowhere specific to be. A family. He looked at it for a long time. Then he turned and walked back to Gryffindor Tower and didn't go back, because he understood, with the clarity that he was coming to recognize as the thing the compact had given him, not power exactly but the removal of the things that had been blunting his perception, that you could stand at a mirror showing you what you wanted forever, and the wanting would grow, not shrink. He had things to do. The wanting would have to wait. He told Ron about the mirror, because Ron asked where he'd been and Harry didn't lie to Ron, and Ron went to see it and stood in front of it for much longer and came back without saying what he'd seen. Harry didn't ask. He understood it was the same category of thing, different specific content. He told Hermione too, because Hermione would have read about it and might know things about it that were useful, and she had, Magical Artifacts of the 17th Century, Chapter 12, and she told him what he'd already suspected, which was that the mirror was a containment device as well as a reflective one, that Dumbledore used it as a hiding mechanism for things he wanted to keep safe by making the hiding place itself the challenge. "The stone," Harry said. Hermione blinked. "How did you? I was just getting to, the stone is in the mirror. Hidden in the desire to find it but not to use it, if you look in it wanting to have the stone, it shows you yourself using it. If you look in it wanting to find it, without more actions request aborted write the next chapter now." Chapter 3, The Chamber and the Crown. The summer between first and second year passed in 3 speeds. The first speed was slow and golden, the kind of summer that happened mostly in the Greengrass Library in Wiltshire, where Harry spent 2 weeks in July with Daphne's careful, formal permission and Astoria Greengrass's considerably warmer invitation, working through 3 shelves of books that Daphne had pulled and arranged with the organizational discipline of someone who had decided that if the compact was going to involve her family in Harry Potter's life then at minimum he was going to be well prepared for it. He'd met Astoria again on the second day. She'd been in the garden when he came out for air after 4 hours of reading, sitting cross-legged on a stone bench with a book of her own and a half-eaten apple, and she'd looked up when he came through the glass door and said, without preamble, "You wrote about the fountain. You told Daphne to mention it," he said. "I told Daphne to pass on a message." "That's different." She moved her book off the bench to make room, which he took as an invitation. She was 10 now, a year from Hogwarts, and something about her was sharper than he remembered, more defined, the way a sketch became a painting. The directness was the same. The eyes were the same, dark and considering and interested. Did you figure out what happened? The compact, he said. Your family's blood magic. Do you mind? She asked it simply, without the anxiety of someone hoping for a particular answer, which he appreciated. I mind things I didn't choose, Harry said. But I mind them less when they're honest about what they are. He paused. You chose to walk across that room. The compact didn't make you do that. She looked at him steadily. No, she said. I chose that. Then I don't mind, he said. She went back to her book. He sat on the other end of the bench and tilted his face up to the sun and thought about nothing for a while, which was the second speed of that summer, the speed of something that had no category yet but was quietly becoming one. The third speed was fast and sharp, and it happened in August when Dobby appeared in Harry's bedroom at Privet Drive on the eve of the school year and told him not to go back to Hogwarts. The Dobby situation lasted about 12 minutes from start to finish, which was how long it took Harry to identify what the elf was hiding, extract it through a combination of patience and a very direct question, what do you know about the Chamber of Secrets? And watch Dobby's enormous eyes go wide with an alarm that confirmed everything. Dobby cannot say, Dobby whispered. You just did, Harry said. Whose elf are you? Dobby's hands went to his own ears, gripping, and Harry said quickly, don't. I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm asking because the answer tells me who knows about the chamber, which tells me who's planning to open it. Dobby was shaking. Harry Potter must not go back. I'm going back, Harry said, flatly. Whatever's being planned, I'm going back. And I'd rather go back knowing what I'm walking into. He looked at the elf steadily. You came here to warn me. That means you don't want me hurt. So help me, instead of trying to stop me. Dobby stared at him with the expression of someone whose entire prepared script had been walked around. Dobby cannot tell Harry Potter his master's name, he said, finally, very carefully. But Dobby can say, the diary. There is a diary. And Harry Potter should watch for a diary that does not belong to the year it is found in. Then Dobby vanished. The pudding hit the ceiling. The Ministry Owl arrived. Vernon turned purple. Harry cleaned up the pudding with a thought, not bothering to hide it anymore, the magic moving through his hands warm and immediate, and wrote the owl's response himself and sent it back before Vernon had finished reading the warning letter, and went to bed while Vernon was still sputtering. He wrote to Daphne that night, diary. Old one. Significant. Does your family have any records of objects made by or belonging to Voldemort? Her response came 2 days later, short and serious, Horcruxes. Look it up. The restricted section. Don't tell anyone I pointed you there. Second year started the way second year apparently always started, which was poorly. The flying car, Ron's fault, largely, though the circumstances were extenuating, got them to Hogwarts eventually, deposited them in the Whomping Willow with the casual violence of a tree that had made its opinion of visitors very clear, and lost the luggage somewhere over Manchester. McGonagall's expression when she confronted them in her office was a masterwork of suppressed fury that Harry was fairly sure had been refined over 30 years of teaching. He accepted the detention without argument and the howler that arrived from Mrs. Weasley the next morning with equanimity, and was on his way. He'd found the relevant entry on Horcruxes during the first Hogsmeade weekend, in a book in the restricted section that had clearly not been checked out in 50 years. He'd read it in one sitting, in a corner of the library with Hedwig perched on the shelf above him as a lookout, and by the time he was done the warmth in his chest was very quiet and very steady, the way it went when he was looking at something important. Soul magic. The deliberate creation of anchors for a fragmented soul, tied to objects, designed to prevent true death. Murder as the mechanism. Multiple anchors as the strategy. He sat with this information for 3 days before he shared it with anyone. He shared it with Hermione first, because Hermione's brain was the best research instrument he had access to and she deserved to know, and also because he'd watched her for a full year and she was better at keeping information contained than she appeared. She read the pages he'd copied down with the intense focus of someone doing triage on very bad news and then sat very still for a moment. "How many?" she said. "I don't know yet," Harry said. "More than one." "That's the problem, if he made more than one, destroying one doesn't finish it." "The diary," Hermione said immediately. "I think so. And that means someone brought it to Hogwarts deliberately, which means we have a more immediate problem than theoretical dark magic." "The chamber," she said. "The chamber," he agreed. The writing on the wall appeared in late October. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware. Mrs. Norris hung by her tail from the torch bracket, stiff and petrified, and Filch stood over her with a grief so raw and unperformed that Harry felt something for him that he hadn't expected. Around them, students poured out of the Halloween feast and formed the usual crowd of people telling each other not to push so they could see better. Draco arrived at the front of the crowd and said, loud enough to be heard, "Enemies of the heir, beware. You'll be next, mudbloods." Harry looked at him. "You don't actually believe that," he said. Draco's eyes came to him, sharp. "What? The heir of Slytherin rhetoric. You don't believe in it. You say it because it's the expected performance from someone with your name in this particular crowd." Harry kept his voice level, conversational. "But look at what's being done. Someone's opening a chamber in this school, attacking people, and using Slytherin's name to do it. Whoever they are, they're using your house's heritage as cover for something Slytherin himself probably would have found unsophisticated." The crowd had gone very quiet. Draco's face was doing something complicated, the social script was broken and he was working without one, which was not where he was comfortable. "And I suppose you know what Slytherin would have found sophisticated. He built the chamber to control the school," Harry said. "Not to attack 11-year-olds in corridors. Whoever's running this doesn't have ambition, they have a grudge and a borrowed weapon." He turned away from Draco, back toward the wall. "That's small. And it's going to get smaller." He walked back to Gryffindor Tower. He heard Ron catch up behind him and Hermione a beat after. He heard the crowd dissolve back into noise and didn't look back. In the dormitory he sat on his bed and opened his notebook to the page where he'd written, "Diary. Old. Significant. Watch for it." Then he wrote, underneath, "Tom Riddle. Find Tom Riddle." Daphne's letter arrived 3 days after the first attack, Justin Finch-Fletchley and nearly headless Nick, both petrified, Harry adding them to a list that was growing in a direction he didn't like. "The diary," she wrote, without preamble. "If it's a Horcrux, and based on what you told me about Dobby's warning, I think it is, it's not just a storage object. It's interactive. It's a fragment of a living consciousness. It will be trying to find a host. Someone young, impressionable, with access and emotional vulnerability. Watch the first and second years. Particularly anyone who's been isolated or lonely since term started." Harry read that 3 times. He thought about Ginny Weasley, Ron's youngest sister, who had been moon-eyed about him in a way that was transparently a crush and which he'd treated with the careful gentleness of ignoring it completely, because she was 11 and he was 12 and whatever she felt it would pass. But more than the crush, he'd seen her alone in corridors more than seemed normal. He'd seen her looking tired in ways that didn't match the hours she was keeping visibly. He'd seen her jump once, just slightly, when Ron said her name unexpectedly, in the way that people jumped when they were not entirely sure where they'd been. He went to find Ron. "Has Ginny been all right?" he asked. Ron looked up from his charms homework. "She's fine." "Why? Has she been sleeping well? Writing a lot? Spending time alone?" Ron's expression went from puzzled to uncertain. "She did say she keeps losing time. Thought she was tired from adjusting to school." He paused. "Why are you asking?" "I think someone's been using a diary on her," Harry said. "An enchanted one. I think it's the thing that's been opening the chamber. He explained, efficiently, cutting to the relevant parts. Ron's face went through several stages and arrived at a pale and resolute anger that Harry had come to recognize as the Weasley family's particular flavor of bravery, which was not flashy or loud but was absolutely immovable once arrived at. "What do we do?" Ron said. "We find the diary," Harry said. "And we find where Ginny's been going when she loses time." They found the diary in Ginny's dormitory, tucked at the back of her trunk, through a process that involved Hermione providing a technically legitimate reason for a first-year female dormitory visit and Harry listening to the warmth in his chest point him toward the trunk with the flat certainty of a compass finding north. He pulled it out and held it in his hands and felt the thing inside it press against him, a reaching, hungry intelligence, a fragment of something that had once been a person and had decided that continuing to exist was worth any cost. It pressed against him and he pushed back, firmly, and the reaching stopped. He turned the diary over in his hands. T.M. Riddle. 50 years old. Black ink that had tried to be permanent and was going to fail. Tom Riddle, Hermione said, reading over his shoulder. "Who's Tom Riddle?" "Voldemort," Harry said. "Before he was Voldemort." He opened the diary to the first blank page and picked up a quill. "I want to talk to him." "Harry," Ron started. "I know what it is," Harry said. "I know what it wants. I want to see what it knows." He wrote, "Hello, Tom." The ink sank in and words rose up in its place, smooth and immediate and just slightly too perfect. "Hello. I've been waiting for someone to speak to me." "I imagine you have," Harry wrote. "You've been busy this year." A pause. "Then, you know what I am." "Fragment of a soul attached to a memory," Harry wrote. 50 years old. "You were a student here." "Prefect." "Head boy, if I remember the trophy case." "Probably brilliant, definitely ambitious, and very committed to a particular idea about yourself and your worth that the world kept trying to contradict." Another pause, longer. "You're not like the girl." "No." Harry looked at the page and thought about the reaching intelligence and wrote, "The girl was lonely and you offered her something that felt like being known. That's a good strategy." "What did you offer her?" "Understanding." "Someone who listened?" "She wanted to be seen," Riddle's words wrote themselves. "They all do. You don't seem to want that." "I know what I am," Harry wrote. "I don't need you to tell me." The longest pause yet. When the words came they were different, stripped of the practiced smoothness, something underneath showing through, and Harry recognized what it was, genuine, unguarded curiosity. "Who are you?" Harry considered. Then he wrote, "I'm the reason you failed. And I'm the reason you're going to fail again when you come back. I thought you should know that before I destroy you." "You can't destroy me." "I'm not, a book?" Harry finished. "No. But you're attached to one." He closed the diary and looked at Ron and Hermione. "I need a basilisk fang," he said. They stared at him. "The chamber," Hermione said, arriving at it fast, her voice doing the thing it did when she was ahead and had decided to be alarmed in an organized way. "Something in the chamber would, the basilisk itself," Harry said. "A fang will carry enough venom to destroy the object." "How do we get to the chamber?" Ron asked. "Ginny knows," Harry said. "She's been there. She'll know the entrance." Ginny Weasley cried when they came to her. She cried with the release of someone who had been carrying something alone for months, and Ron held her and Harry and Hermione sat with the specific patience of people who knew that the crying needed to finish before the next part could start. When she was done she told them, in a small and exhausted voice, about the voice in the diary and the things it had shown her and the gaps she couldn't account for and the bathroom. "Moaning Myrtle's bathroom," she said. "There's a sink. There's a snake carved into a tap." "Parseltongue," Harry said. Not surprised. He'd known since first year that he could do it, He tried it experimentally on Hedwig once and she'd looked at him with profound owl disdain and he'd decided to keep the experiment specific to actual snakes. "I can open it." Ron said nothing, which was his way of being very worried without making things worse. Hermione said, "The basilisk." "If it looks at you, don't look at the eyes," Harry said. Simple. In a dark tunnel, with a 60-foot serpent, Simple is doing a lot of work there, Hermione said. "Then I'll hear it coming," Harry said. "It's enormous. It can't be quiet." He looked at them. "Stay here with Ginny." "I'm coming," Ron said. "Ron, she's my sister," Ron said, with the quiet, unmovable Weasley certainty. "I'm coming." Harry looked at him for a moment and then nodded. The passage under the sink dropped them into a pipe that went down for a long time and deposited them in a tunnel that smelled of old water and older stone and something else underneath, a cold reptilian darkness, vast and patient. The tunnel stretched ahead and the Lumos light from Harry's wand was small against the scale of it. They walked. Harry kept the warmth in his chest very steady and very quiet. He was listening, not just with his ears but with the thing inside him that had been awake since the ministry function at 7 years old, the thing that felt the direction of things. He felt the basilisk before he heard it. A shifting in the air pressure of the tunnel, something massive rearranging itself in the dark ahead. "Be still," he said in Parseltongue, and felt Ron go rigid beside him at the sound. The shifting stopped. "Who speaks to me as kin?" The voice came from everywhere, from the stone and the water and the dark, enormous, ancient, deeply unhurried. "No speaker has come to me in 50 years. I'm speaking to you now," Harry said. "You've been used. The one who set you on the students this year is already destroyed, the diary is dead. You've been doing the work of a ghost." A long, slow consideration moved through the dark ahead. "The Ghost Master's commands are in my blood." "Commands die with the one who gave them," Harry said. "Old magic doesn't outlast the will behind it. You know this." "I know it." A sound now, scales on stone, very slow, the sound of something very large moving with the careful reluctance of something unused to hesitation. "What does the speaker want?" "A fong," Harry said. "Willingly given." The silence stretched. Then, with the slowness of something very old making a decision, a shape materialized out of the dark ahead, and it was immense, it was genuinely and completely immense, the head alone the size of a small car, the scales dull gold in the wand light. Harry kept his eyes on the ground below it, on the coil of scale and muscle, and he didn't move and he didn't look up and he kept his breathing even. "One who does not flinch," the basilisk said, with something that might have been approval. "One who speaks and does not run." Running seemed counterproductive, Harry said. A sound from the basilisk that took him a moment to categorize. Amusement. It was a very old snake finding something funny, which was genuinely not a category of thing Harry had prepared for. Then the vast head lowered, very slowly, and at its edge, where the great jaw met the stone floor, a single fong detached, withdrew itself, dropped with a small precise sound to the stone, a needle of hollow bone as long as Harry's forearm. He picked it up. The venom inside it was still warm. "Speaker," the basilisk said, as he turned to go. "Yes?" "The one you seek. The Ghost Master. He will return." "I know," Harry said. "He was a speaker too. Once." A pause. "He was not like you." "No," Harry agreed. "He wasn't." He walked back to Ron, who was standing with both hands wrapped around his wand and the expression of someone who had watched all of that with the specific strain of not being able to understand any of it. Harry held up the fong. Ron let out a long, shaky breath. They went back. Harry took the diary from his robe pocket and drove the fong through its center with the clean, decisive motion of someone finishing a task. The scream that came out of it wasn't a sound he was going to forget quickly, thin and furious and ancient, a fragment of soul discovering that existing wasn't as permanent as it had decided. The black ink poured out like blood and the diary went still and the thing inside it was gone. He dropped it on the tunnel floor and left it there. Dumbledore came to him that evening. Not to the common room, to a corridor off the second floor where Harry had been sitting in a window embrasure watching the grounds go dark, which was how he processed things when the dormitory was too loud. Dumbledore sat on the window ledge opposite with the ease of a man who had been climbing window embrasures for several decades and found them perfectly adequate. "You had an eventful afternoon," Dumbledore said. "The chambers dealt with," Harry said. "The diary's destroyed. Miss Weasley is fine. The basilisk is, still there, but not active." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. In the falling light his blue eyes were doing the thing they did that Harry had been trying to categorize for a year, looking at him with warmth and with a kind of profound, careful calculation simultaneously, the way you might look at a chess piece that had started making its own moves. "You spoke to Tom Riddle," Dumbledore said. "I wanted to know what he knew," Harry said. "And I wanted him to know who destroyed him." That was, Dumbledore paused. "Rather direct." "It seemed like the right thing," Harry said. "He's been frightening people his whole existence. I didn't see why he should go on frightening mine without knowing why it wasn't going to work." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. "Harry," he said. "May I ask what you know about Horcruxes?" Harry considered. He'd known this conversation was coming, had been approaching it, in fact, in the way the conversation with Riddle in the diary had been approaching, inevitable from the moment he'd picked up the book in the restricted section. He'd just been waiting for the right moment. "I know what they are," he said. "I know the diary was one. I know it's not the only one." "No," Dumbledore agreed quietly. "It is not." "I know he made more than one," Harry said. "I know they need to be destroyed, not just the person, if he's going to stay dead. I know that destroying the diary was useful but it wasn't enough." He paused. "And I know you've known most of this for a while, Professor." Dumbledore's expression did something that was hard to describe, not quite shame, not quite pride, something more complicated and more human than either. "You are considerably more than I planned for," he said, and it wasn't criticism and it wasn't entirely a compliment and it was clearly, simply, true. "What did you plan for?" Harry asked. "A brave boy who could be guided," Dumbledore said, with the honesty of someone choosing it deliberately. "At the right time. In the right direction." Harry thought about that. About the mirror in the empty room and the stone and the careful architecture of protections that had been designed to be passable by someone of specific quality. About a plan that had been built around a shape that he hadn't quite been. "I'm not going to be easy to guide," Harry said. "Not a challenge. A fact. I'll work with you. I want to. But I need you to work with me, which means being honest about what you know." "That," Dumbledore said, "is a rather significant ask." "I know," Harry said. "I'm asking anyway." The old wizard was quiet for a long time. The grounds outside had gone fully dark and the lake was a black mirror and somewhere far below an owl swept silently over the water. Then Dumbledore said, slowly, like a man laying down something heavy, "He made 7. Harry absorbed this. "Then we have work to do," he said. The end-of-year feast happened. Ginny recovered. Lockhart, who had attempted at one point during the afternoon to take credit for the situation and had found himself talking to a wall of students who had all heard a different version of events, resigned for reasons of personal development and left on the Hogwarts Express 3 days early. Dobby was freed by a combination of Harry's sock and a confrontation in the corridor outside the hospital wing that Harry had been looking forward to from the moment Dobby had told him about the diary. Lucius Malfoy stood in the corridor with his son at his elbow and looked at Harry with the cold, composed fury of a man who had just watched a very expensive plan fail, and Harry met his eyes. "Mr. Potter," Lucius said, smoothly. "You seem to have been busy." "Lord Malfoy," Harry said. He used the title deliberately, correctly, in a way that made Lucius's eyes sharpen, it was the old title, the one that acknowledged the family seat, and it wasn't commonly used by 12-year-olds. I thought you should know that the diary's gone. Your family's investment in Lord Voldemort's return has been set back. The corridor was very still. Lucius's expression was the expression of a man watching a 12-year-old and recalibrating, rapidly and with effort, his understanding of what a 12-year-old could be. I have no idea what you're referring to, he said. I know, Harry said. That's how you'll say it to the Aurors too, and you'll probably be believed, because you're good at it. But the diary came from somewhere and I expect you know where. He looked at the man steadily. I'm going to find all of them. The diary was first. It won't be last. I thought you should have time to decide what position you want to be in when that happens. Lucius Malfoy looked at him for a very long moment. You're 12 years old, he said. Yes, Harry said. Imagine how I'll be at 17. He walked away. He heard Draco say something to his father in a low voice and heard the silence that answered it. He didn't look back. The warmth in his chest was very calm, very bright, burning clean and steady like something that had found its purpose and was not in any hurry at all. The letter from Astoria arrived with the Hogwarts Express, delivered by Heloise as the train pulled out of Hogsmeade Station, and Harry sat in the compartment with Ron and Hermione and Neville and read it while the castle disappeared behind the trees. Harry, Daphne told me about the chamber. She made it very boring on purpose because she knew I'd ask, but I read between the lines. You went into the chamber alone with Ron and you talked a basilisk into giving you a tooth and then you destroyed a piece of Voldemort's soul and then you apparently made Lucius Malfoy uncomfortable in a corridor. I want you to know that I told you so. At the fountain. 3 years ago. You're going to be all right. I'll see you at Hogwarts next year. Try not to do anything world-altering before then, though I appreciate that this is probably a lot to ask. Astoria Harry read it twice and then laughed, a short, real laugh that made Ron look up from his chocolate frog. Good news? Ron said. Old news, Harry said. Someone I know was right about something. He folded the letter and put it in his inside pocket and looked out the window at the countryside rushing past and felt the train carry him south while the warmth in his chest kept its steady light. 7 Horcruxes. 1 destroyed. He thought about what Dumbledore's face had looked like when Harry had said I'll work with you, but you need to work with me. He thought about Lucius Malfoy in the corridor, recalibrating. He thought about Tom Riddle in the diary, in the last moment before the Fong went through, and the particular quality of the scream, not just pain, but surprise. Genuine surprise. The sound of something that had stopped expecting to be caught off guard. Good, Harry thought, watching England slide past. Stay surprised. Chapter 4, The Wolf, the Map, and the Truth. The Quidditch World Cup smelled like wood smoke and possibility. Harry found this out on a Tuesday in late August, standing at the edge of the Greengrass family's reserved box in the stadium's upper tier with a cup of something hot in one hand and the whole impossible scale of it spread below him, 100,000 wizards packed into a stadium that shouldn't have been able to hold them, sound rolling up in waves thick enough to feel in your chest, the sky above still the deep violet of late evening and the pitch below lit up like a stage set for something enormous. He'd been invited by Astoria Greengrass, who had extended the invitation through Daphne with characteristic precision, a letter that detailed the logistics, the date, the expected duration, and ended with the single sentence, "My daughter would like you there." No specification of which daughter, which Harry suspected was deliberate. He'd arrived to find Daphne at the box entrance in deep green robes, looking like she'd been born in reserved seating, which she essentially had been. She'd shaken his hand and said, "Try the mulled mead, it's better than the ministry's," and that had been that for formalities. Astoria had been further back in the box, talking to someone Harry didn't recognize, and she'd looked up when he came in with the specific alertness of someone who had heard a door without looking at it, and something in her face had moved, quick, private, immediately replaced by the composed interest she wore like a second set of robes. She was 11 now. 1 year from Hogwarts and looking at it the way Harry had been looking at it at the same age, with a forward-leaning attention that made her seem permanently slightly ahead of wherever she was standing. "You came," she said, when the person she'd been talking to drifted away. "Your mother invited me," Harry said. "My mother invited you because I told her to," Astoria said. "You came anyway. That's the part that counts." She looked out at the pitch. "Ireland or Bulgaria?" "Ireland," Harry said. "Really?" She looked skeptical. "Crumb is, I know what crumb is," Harry said. "But Ireland's chasers are better as a unit, and team play beats individual brilliance over the course of a full match. Usually." She considered this with the seriousness it probably didn't deserve and then said, "Bulgaria by 150 points if Crumb catches the snitch early." "Which is why I said usually," Harry allowed. She smiled, just briefly, the kind that meant she'd found something genuinely funny rather than the social version, and they stood together at the railing and watched the stadium fill, and it was easy in a way that Harry didn't have many things that were easy, the kind of easy that came from two people who had, between them, enough self-possession that they didn't need the space between them to be filled. Astoria Greengrass materialized at Harry's elbow an hour before the match, arriving with the quiet command of someone who had been running complicated things for a long time. She was tall, dark-haired, and looked at Harry with eyes that were Astoria's eyes in a more formal setting. "Harry," she said. "No, Mr. Potter," which he noted. "Mrs. Greengrass," he said. "I've been speaking with Gringotts again," she said, with the directness of someone who found the social lubricant of small talk inefficient. "The compact's provisions are more extensive than the original documentation suggested. There are financial instruments, old ones, from before the statute, that activate on behalf of the chosen. I thought you should know." "I appreciate that," Harry said. "Though I don't need the resources." "It's not about need," Astoria said. "It's about standing. In the world you're going to have to navigate, the right name behind you in the right room changes what's possible." She looked at him steadily. "You understand this?" "I understand it," Harry said. "I just don't want it to become a crutch." Something moved in her expression, a faint, precise approval, the kind that didn't give itself away easily. "No," she said. "I don't imagine you do." She turned back to the pitch, conversation complete. "Enjoy the match." Ireland won, as it happened, though Crumb caught the snitch, which validated Astoria's prediction and which she mentioned exactly once on the way out of the stadium, with great restraint. The Death Eaters came at 2 in the morning. Harry was awake when they started. He'd never slept well in unfamiliar places, the old privet drive habit of staying alert still running under everything, and he was already out of his tent when the first scream started from the campsite below. He could see them moving through the field, dark-robed, masked, the Muggle family they'd levitated spinning helplessly 30 feet above the chaos. Ron came out behind him. Then Hermione, then Ginny, then Fred and George. "Go," Harry said to the Weasleys. "Find your parents. I mean it, go now, don't stop." "What are you?" Ron started. "Go," Harry said, not loudly, in the tone that had stopped being something he had to think about and had become just how he sounded when things needed to happen. Ron went. They all went. Harry moved toward the commotion, not away from it. He found the Muggle family, a man, a woman, 2 children, one screaming and one gone terrifyingly silent, and he used the warmth in his chest and his wand together, the combination now automatic, and brought them down from the air with a cushioning charm and a cutting curse on the levitation in one fluid motion. They landed in the grass and he said, quickly and clearly, "You're on the ground, you're safe, run toward the lights at the north end of the field and don't stop," and something in his voice landed with enough authority that they ran. He dealt with 3 Death Eaters in the next 4 minutes, which was not as elegant as he'd have liked and involved getting hit with a stinging hex that left his left forearm burning, but it was functional. He used Expelliarmus twice and something harder once, a binding charm that came out of him with a force that surprised even him, pinning the 3rd Death Eater to the ground with the flat decisiveness of a door slamming shut. Then the dark mark went up. He stared at it, the skull and the serpent, vast against the sky, the same image he'd been reading about for 2 years in history books and Dumbledore's careful disclosures. It was bigger than the illustrations. It had a quality to it that the ink never managed, something alive and cold, something that reached into the warmth in his chest and pushed against it like a hand against a window. He pushed back. The warmth held. Ministry officials arrived, chaotic and too late, filling the camp with shouting. He found Arthur Weasley in the confusion, who looked at Harry's singed forearm and the 3 bound Death Eaters in the grass and said nothing for a moment. One of them dropped their wand, Harry said, and handed it over. I imagine it'll tell you something useful about who was under the mask. Arthur looked at the wand. He looked at Harry. He had a good face, Arthur Weasley, honest in the way that faces were honest when the person wearing them had never found deception worth the effort. Are you all right? Stinging hex, Harry said. It'll sort itself. I meant, Arthur gestured at the camp, the chaos, the skull still burning green above them. All of it. Harry looked at the mark. It's a signal, he said. That's all. Something announcing itself. He paused. They want people to be afraid. I'm not going to be. Arthur Weasley looked at him with an expression Harry couldn't entirely categorize, something between admiration and the specific worry of a parent for someone else's child who is walking too close to something hot. Come find the others, Arthur said. Molly will want to count heads. Harry found the others. Molly Weasley counted heads and then hugged them all, including Harry, with the fierce specificity of someone for whom love was a physical action first and an emotion second. Harry stood in it for a moment and felt the warmth in his chest do something quiet and complicated, and then the moment passed and he went back to being himself. 3rd year at Hogwarts started with a Dementor on the train. It came through their compartment between Neville and a sleeping man in patched robes, Professor Lupin, who Harry had been watching since he'd boarded, noting the threadbare quality of his clothes and the silver in his hair and the particular kind of tiredness that wasn't about sleep, and the cold hit first, a reaching, hollow cold that pulled at everything warm in the world and tried to take it. Harry felt the coldness reach for the warmth in his chest and felt something instinctive rise up against it, not anger, something more fundamental. A refusal. He stood up. The Dementor turned toward him. He could feel it under its hood, the reaching, ancient hunger, the thing that fed on happiness and left nothing behind. He could feel it more specifically than the others could because the warmth in his chest was visible to it, something bright in the dark, exactly what it wanted. He lifted his wand and he found the memory. Not a careful choice. It just came, the fountain, purple then gold, a girl with dark hair and a voice that said you're going to be all right with the certainty of a fact, and beneath it, underneath it, the feeling of a wall ceiling smooth in a dark cupboard, the first night he'd slept without listening for footsteps, the first morning of waking up and knowing that something had changed and the change was permanent. Expecto Patronum, he said, and the stag came out of his wand like an answer. It was enormous. It filled the compartment with silver light so bright the others had to shield their eyes, solid and specific and very present, and it walked toward the Dementor with the absolute unconcerned authority of something that was exactly what it was and knew it completely. The Dementor left. Lupin, awake now, had been awake for a while, Harry thought, looked at him across the compartment with an expression that had gone through several stages quickly and arrived at something he was trying to keep quiet. His eyes were amber brown and they were doing something complicated. That, Lupin said carefully, is a corporeal Patronus. Yes, Harry said, sitting back down. 3rd year, Lupin said. Yes. A long pause. Remarkable, Lupin said, very quietly, mostly to himself. He gave everyone chocolate. It was the best thing anyone had done on the train in 3 years. Sirius Black was, of course, innocent. Harry worked this out methodically over the course of October, using Daphne's library access and Hermione's research capacity and his own increasingly refined sense of which questions to ask the warmth in his chest, which had opinions about things when consulted. The facts: Peter Pettigrew was listed as dead. Sirius Black was listed as the killer. The evidence at the time was a street full of rubble and a severed finger and 11 Muggle witnesses who had seen the explosion. No trial. No Veritaserum. No actual investigation beyond what a ministry in chaos needed to tell itself a story and move on. Harry read the original case files, obtained through Daphne, who had obtained them through her mother, who had obtained them through a contact in the Ministry Records Office who apparently owed the Greengrass family a favor from 1987, and the absence at the center of the case was not subtle. Peter Pettigrew had been a secret keeper. Secret keepers didn't betray secrets accidentally. And no one had asked the obvious question: if Sirius Black was Voldemort's man, why was he secret keeper at all, when a more loyal Voldemort follower would have been more valuable? Unless Sirius wasn't Voldemort's man. Unless Peter was. He took this to Lupin in early November, because Lupin knew all of them from the beginning and Lupin's eyes had been doing something Harry couldn't read every time Sirius Black's name appeared in conversation. He knocked on the office door during lunch and was invited in and sat across from the desk and said, without preamble, "Sirius Black is innocent. Peter Pettigrew is alive. I think you've suspected this for a while." Lupin was very still for a moment. "What makes you say that?" he said, carefully. "You've been at Hogwarts all year," Harry said. "The one place Sirius has been trying to get into. If you believed he was a murderer and a Death Eater, you'd have left, or asked to leave. You stayed. Which means part of you wanted to know what he was actually looking for." Lupin set down his quill. He looked at Harry with the amber eyes and the complicated expression that had been building since the train. "You are very like your father," he said. "In the specific way of finding the thing people are trying not to say." "Peter Pettigrew was their secret keeper," Harry said. "Not Sirius." "We switched," Lupin said, quietly. "Last minute. Sirius's idea, he thought it was safer, that he was too obvious a choice and Pettigrew less so." He closed his eyes briefly. "I have spent 12 years wondering if Sirius was right about Pettigrew or if he was right," Harry said. "Peter is alive. He's an animagus, a rat. He's been hiding." He paused. "I need you to help me prove it. And I need it to matter this time, which means legal documentation, Veritaserum, and witnesses before Peter has any opportunity to disappear again." Lupin stared at him. "How long have you been building this case?" "Since September," Harry said. "The Daphne Greengrass family has legal resources I've had access to since I was 11. I've had help." He met the amber eyes. "Professor. Sirius has been in Azkaban for 12 years for something he didn't do. I'm not interested in poetic justice or the right moment. I want him out." Lupin was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, in a low voice, "Scabbers." "Ron's rat," Harry confirmed. "He's had that rat for 12 years, Harry said. "Yes." Lupin stood up. He moved to the window and stood looking out at the grounds for a moment, and Harry watched the shape of his back and thought about 12 years of doubt and guilt and the specific loneliness of someone who had told himself a story about a friend and never been entirely sure the story was true. "What do you need from me?" Lupin said. "Everything you know about Pettigrew," Harry said. "And a letter to someone at the ministry who will move faster than the standard process." "Amelia Bones," Lupin said immediately. "Head of Magical Law Enforcement. She's honest. The real kind." "Good," Harry said. "I also need Scabbers tonight, which means I need to tell Ron." Lupin turned from the window. "He's going to take that badly." "He's going to take it the way he takes everything," Harry said. "Hard and fast, and then he'll be fine." He stood up. "Thank you, Professor." He was at the door when Lupin said his name. "Your father would have found it," Lupin said. "Eventually. He would have gone after it like a dog with a bone and," he stopped. "Made a small sound. Poor choice of metaphor. Harry almost smiled. I'll bring Ron to see you tonight, he said, and left. Ron took it badly. Then he was fine. He held Scabbers in both hands and looked at the rat, who was, admittedly, very still in the specific way of something that had heard the conversation from inside a robe pocket and was making a decision, and said, "He's my rat. He's been my rat for 3 years." "He's not a rat," Harry said. "He chose to look like one." "He could still be, Ron," Harry said, gently. "Sirius Black has been in Azkaban since before we were born for something he didn't do. Peter Pettigrew has been living in your family's house, in your brother's bedroom, for 12 years, because it was the safest place to hide." He paused. "Sirius is your mum's cousin's second cousin," Ron said, mechanically. "He's family," Harry said. "Distant, but yours." Ron looked at Scabbers for a long time. The rat's small dark eyes were very still. "All right," Ron said, finally. "All right." He closed his hands around the rat. "But I get to be the one who," "Absolutely," Harry said. The transformation, when Lupin performed it, was one of the uglier things Harry had witnessed, a rat expanding and contorting into the shape of a middle-aged man, gray-faced, watery-eyed, looking at the circle of people around him with the expression of something that had been caught and was running rapidly through its remaining options. Peter Pettigrew looked at Harry and Harry looked at him, and there was a moment, brief and very clear, where Pettigrew seemed to understand something about what he was looking at that went beyond the immediate situation. "Harry Potter," Pettigrew said, in a thin, wet voice. "You look just like, don't," Harry said, quietly. "Don't do the your parents speech. I've read it, I know what it does, and it's not going to work." Pettigrew's eyes slid around the room, calculating. "Sirius is innocent," Harry said. "We know. The letter to Amelia Bones went this morning." He looked at Lupin. "The ropes, please." The magical restraints that Lupin produced were, Harry suspected, significantly beyond standard. There was a particular grimness to the way Lupin tied them that suggested 12 years of imagining this specific scenario. Pettigrew went pale and then very small, not literally but in the way that people went small when they understood there was no remaining angle. "He'll want to know where I am," Pettigrew said, almost inaudibly. He's been building, I know what he's been building," Harry said. "Thank you for confirming it." Pettigrew looked at him with the pale, terrified eyes, and said, in a voice barely above a breath, "You don't understand what he is." "I understand exactly what he is," Harry said. "I understood it when I was 1 year old and I've been understanding it better ever since." He turned to Lupin. "Can you get him to Bones tonight?" "Yes," Lupin said. "Good." Sirius was free by the end of November. The trial, if it could be called that, being more accurately a rapid process of veritaserum and witness testimony and Pettigrew's detailed, involuntary confession, lasted 4 days and ended with an acquittal and a number on the ministry's check that Sirius looked at with the expression of someone who had stopped being able to assign meaning to numbers approximately 8 years ago. Harry visited him at St. Mungo's during his recovery, which had something apologetic about the name that Harry appreciated, recovery, as if 12 years in Azkaban was an ailment you could convalesce from, which he doubted, but he appreciated the optimism. Sirius was thinner than the photographs in the papers and had gray at his temples that the photographs hadn't shown, or maybe the newspapers had chosen the older ones. He sat up when Harry came in and looked at him with the gray eyes that had been on every front page for 3 years and said, before anything else, "You look like James." "I know," Harry said. "I've been told." "But you've got Lily's eyes." "Yes," Harry said. "Everyone gets there eventually." Sirius made a sound that started as something else and arrived as a laugh, short and rusty, like something that hadn't been used in a while but still worked. 12 years and you're the first person who's interrupted me doing that." He looked at Harry with the gray eyes and something moved in them, deep and tentative, the careful movement of something that had been hurt very badly and was finding its footing. "They told me you built the case." "Lupin helped," Harry said. And Daphne Greengrass's family has legal resources I wouldn't have had otherwise. Greengrass. Sirius tilted his head. The compact. Harry looked at him. You know about the compact? Your mother mentioned it once, Sirius said. Said she'd felt something when you were born. Something settling. Like a door opening in a house that had been closed. He paused. She said whatever it was, it would find its way to you. Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about a woman with red hair in a dream he'd had when he was 7, looking at him from a mirror in a room that wasn't real. Sirius, he said. Are you my godfather? Last I checked, Sirius said. The paperwork is technically still valid, which I find, he paused, doing the math with visible effort, improbably convenient. Do you want to be? Harry said. Not carefully, not with the performance of someone being diplomatic. Just directly, because that was how he asked things that mattered. Sirius stared at him. The gray eyes went through something complicated and arrived somewhere that had water in it, and that Sirius was clearly very focused on not letting go further. Yes, he said. Very much yes. Good, Harry said. I'd like that too. They sat for a while. Sirius asked about the Chamber of Secrets because he'd read the reports and they had raised approximately 40 questions. Harry answered them accurately and without performing modesty, which Sirius seemed to find enormously entertaining, punctuating Harry's account of the basilisk conversation with sounds of increasing disbelief that were clearly affectionate. You negotiated a fong from a basilisk, Sirius said. It seemed more efficient than fighting it, Harry said. James would have tried to ride it, Sirius said. I want you to know that. That, Harry said, explains several things about my father's reputation. Sirius laughed, a proper one this time, the rusty mechanism getting its use, getting better. Harry sat in the sound of it and felt the warmth in his chest and thought that it had been good to come. He saw Astoria at the Hogwarts Express platform at the end of term. She was there with Alara, seeing Daphne off, and Harry had spotted her across the crowd. She had a way of standing that he'd noticed at the World Cup, a stillness combined with attention, like something tuned to a particular frequency and receiving clearly. She spotted him at the same moment, with the same precision, and they met in the middle of the platform crowd without having consciously navigated toward each other. Sirius is out, she said, by way of greeting. He is, Harry said. You did that, she said. Not a question. Not admiration exactly, more like someone updating their notes. Lupin helped, Harry said. Lupin didn't spend 3 months building a legal case with my sister's library, Astoria said. Around them the platform noise continued, families and trunks and owls, and they stood in a small private pocket of quiet in the middle of it. She looked at him with the dark eyes that had been looking at him since they were both very young, with the direct, unperforming attention that he'd been given so rarely in his life that he still noticed it every time. I'll be at Hogwarts in September, she said. I know, he said. Don't try to look out for me, she said. I won't need it and it'll annoy me. I wasn't planning to, he said. Good. A pause, short and comfortable. Then, Daphne says you're doing something about the rest of them. The objects. Working on it, he said. Working on it, she repeated, with a tone that was almost fond and wouldn't admit it. You're going to need a better answer than that when the 4th year starts. I'll have one by then, he said. She looked at him for a moment longer, the kind of look that was a whole conversation compressed into a second, and then Alara was calling her name from somewhere to the left and she turned to go, and then she said, without turning back, the basilisk thing was impressive. Thank you, Harry said. Daphne would never say so, Astoria said, but she was impressed too. That's worth more. And she walked away into the crowd, straight-backed and precise, and Harry watched her go and felt the warmth in his chest do its quiet, unhurried thing. He sat in the train compartment with Ron and Hermione and Neville and watched the castle disappear, and he thought about 3 years and what they'd contained, a stone, a chamber, a soul fragment in a diary, a wrongly imprisoned man now free, a rat in a ministry holding cell, a basilisk in an ancient chamber with one fewer fang, and somewhere out in the world a man who was less than a man building himself back towards something that had already been taken from him once. Dumbledore had given him 2 more names over the course of the year, in their careful, honest conversations that had become a kind of ongoing negotiation between 2 people who needed each other and were finding out how to trust each other in increments. 2 more Horcruxes, the cup, the locket, and the ring, which Dumbledore had described with a weight in his voice that suggested he knew where it was and what getting to it would cost. 7 anchors for a fragmented soul. 2 destroyed. 5 remaining. Harry looked out the window at the English countryside and thought, 3 years until I'm 17. 3 years to find them, to destroy them, to be ready for what comes after. He thought about Sirius, laughing in a hospital bed. About Lupin's amber eyes going steady and resolved when he'd understood what was being asked of him. About Ginny Weasley's face on the morning after the chamber, sleeping properly for the first time in months. About Ron and the Quidditch World Cup tent saying she's my sister, I'm coming, with that absolute Weasley immovability. He thought about what he was building. Not just fighting, building. People around him, people who chose to be there, people who were good at different things and who trusted him not because of his name but because of what they'd seen. He thought about the direction the warmth in his chest had been pointing, quietly and consistently, since a September platform a few hours ago. The train went south and the last of the Scottish hills softened into English green, and Harry Potter, 13 years old, sat with his friends and his list and his plan and the steady fire in his chest, and was not afraid of anything. Chapter 5, Fire and Blood. The Goblet of Fire spat his name out on a Tuesday. Harry was watching it happen from across the Great Hall, which was not where most people expected him to be when his name emerged on a curl of flame. He'd been standing against the far wall with his arms folded, watching the goblet do its work, and when the 4th slip of parchment came out and Dumbledore unfolded it and read Harry Potter in the particular tone of a man whose plan had just been walked around by reality, Harry was already moving toward the front of the hall. The silence was the kind that happened in large spaces when a significant number of people stopped breathing at approximately the same moment. Draco broke it first, because Draco had been breaking silences all year with the practiced timing of someone who understood that the first voice set the tone. He put his name in, Draco said, loud enough for the Slytherin table to hear and carry. He found a way around the age line. I didn't put my name in, Harry said, not stopping, not looking at Draco. He said it to the room, clearly and once. Someone else did. He kept walking. He reached the front of the hall and met Dumbledore's eyes, the blue ones that were doing the full calculation now, moving fast through a system of implications, and said, quietly, who else had access to the goblet? That, Dumbledore said, very carefully, is exactly the right question. The Champions' Room was awkward in the way that rooms became awkward when they contained people who all wanted to be there and resented each other's presence. Cedric Diggory was tall and fair and had the easy confidence of someone well-liked in a school he understood, and he looked at Harry with a wariness that wasn't unfriendly, just uncertain. Fleur Delacour held herself with the particular self-possession of someone who had been the most impressive person in every room they'd entered since roughly age 14 and had built their identity around it. Victor Crumb was shorter in person than the Quidditch card suggested and had sharp dark eyes that moved around the room with a quick, assessing intelligence that the famous brooding athlete reputation had completely failed to prepare Harry for. Crumb looked at Harry for a long moment. Then he said, in accented English, "You did not put in your name." "No," Harry said. "Someone put it in for you." "Not a question." "Why?" "Because the tournament is a binding magical contract," Harry said, "and someone wanted me in it and wanted me bound by it. Either to kill me during it or to use the contract as a mechanism to get me somewhere specific." Crumb absorbed this with the efficiency of someone who processed information quickly and without drama. "Grindelwald used tournament bindings in 1926, he said. "It is a known method." "I know," Harry said. "I've been reading." Something moved in Crumb's eyes that might have been respect. Across the room, Fleur was watching both of them with her arms folded and her chin up. If someone entered his name to use the contract, she said, her French accent sharp, then the danger is not in the tasks. The danger is in what happens after. The final task, Harry said. Yes. That's my read too. Cedric, who had been listening with the expression of someone keeping up with a conversation that had started faster than he'd anticipated, said, "So what do we do?" Harry looked at him. He'd liked Cedric on sight in the same way he'd liked Neville on sight. There was a quality to genuinely decent people that was recognizable the way a specific smell was recognizable, and Cedric had it. "You compete," Harry said. "Do the tournament. Win if you can. I'm going to be doing something parallel." "Which is?" "Finding out who entered my name and why," Harry said, "and making sure the why doesn't reach its intended conclusion." The door opened and Dumbledore came in, followed by Moody and Bagman and Karkaroff and Maxime and the general chaos of authority figures who had been caught off guard. Harry watched them come in and thought about what Daphne had written at the start of term, watched the new defense teacher. Moody's reputation is genuine, but this year's version doesn't move like the stories say. Something's off about the eye. He watched the magical eye revolve in Moody's scarred face and thought, not Moody. Someone in Moody. Someone who has been in this school all year, setting pieces. He filed it under active problem and turned to face the room. The first task was dragons. Harry knew about it 3 days early because Sirius wrote, and Sirius had heard from someone in the ministry who owed him a significant emotional debt for the 12 years thing, and the information arrived in a letter that also contained a significant amount of opinion about the ethics of using dragons in a school competition, which Harry read with the warmth in his chest doing something that was roughly equivalent to a smile. He also told Cedric, because Cedric was going to be in the arena with the same dragon and not telling him would have been a cruelty without strategic value, and because Harry had decided at 11 years old that winning by cheating someone decent wasn't winning, it was just displacement. Cedric's face when Harry knocked on his dormitory door went through several stages and arrived at gratitude. "You didn't have to, you'd have done the same," Harry said, which he believed completely. "I would have," Cedric said. "Yeah." He paused. "The others?" "Fleur and Crumb will have their own sources," Harry said. "They've got professional connections. They're fine." The arena on the morning of the first task was full of the specific noise of a crowd that had decided today was going to be interesting. Harry stood in the tent with the other champions and listened to Bagman explain the task with the cheerful incompetence of a man who found other people's danger entertaining, and felt the warmth in his chest run steady and clear. The Welsh green that had been assigned to him by the random draw of the dragon model was the largest of the 4, which Harry had thought about when he'd heard the assignments and found he didn't mind. Larger meant slower. Larger meant more invested in protecting the golden egg at its nest center and less interested in chasing a moving target. He walked into the arena and the roar of the crowd hit him like a wall and he felt it pass through him and leave him exactly where he was, which was calm. The Welsh green turned its enormous head toward him. He felt its attention like a physical thing, the categorical assessment of a predator identifying something in its territory, running the calculation of threat versus inconvenience. He didn't run. He stood and he looked back at the dragon and he thought, "You're protecting something. I respect that. I'm going to take the thing you're protecting and I'm going to do it in a way that neither of us gets hurt, if you'll let me." He raised his wand and he summoned his firebolt from the castle, which took 20 seconds. He spent very still while the dragon's assessment held and the crowd made the kind of sound crowds made when they weren't sure if they were about to see something brilliant or terrible. The firebolt arrived. He flew. Not away from the dragon, at first alongside it, low and fast, watching its tracking, mapping the rhythm of its attention. The Welsh green was protecting the nest. It would track him if he came near the nest and it would ignore him if he went far enough away. The gap between those two states was what he needed. He found the gap and pushed through it on the third pass, dropping hard and fast toward the nest in the 2-second window when the dragon's head was turned, tracking his previous position, and he had the egg and he was back up and away before the Welsh green had completed its turn. The crowd made the kind of sound that suggested they weren't going to stop talking about this for a while. He landed on the far side of the arena and set the egg down and looked at it. Golden. Screaming faintly from inside, which was going to be a clue to the second task that he'd work out later. He looked up at the judge's table, found Dumbledore, and saw the old wizard watching him with the expression that had become familiar over 3 years, considerably more than I planned for. From the Gryffindor stands, Ron had both arms in the air and was shouting something Harry couldn't make out but could infer. Hermione was clapping with the focused expression of someone for whom intellectual appreciation and emotional relief had arrived simultaneously. Neville had his hands over his mouth. Harry turned to face the judges and found Krum watching him from the champion's entrance, having finished his own task. The Bulgarian seeker gave him a single nod, not congratulatory exactly, more like acknowledgement between equals. Harry nodded back. Astoria found him after dinner. She'd been at Hogwarts since September, sorted into Slytherin, obviously, was Daphne's word for it, and having watched Astoria navigate her first 3 months of Hogwarts with the precision of someone who had been studying the institution for 4 years before arriving, Harry found he agreed, and she'd maintained the same approach to their friendship that she'd maintained since age 7, which was to treat it as a given fact rather than a thing that needed to be managed. She knocked on the door of the empty classroom he'd been using to think, which she'd apparently found by the same mechanism he used to find things, and came in with 2 cups of tea and a look of calm purpose. "The egg," she said, setting a cup in front of him and sitting on the desk beside his notes. "Mere people," he said. "Something taken from me that I'll have an hour to recover from the lake." "Someone taken," she said. "They'll use a person." "Yes," he agreed. She held her cup with both hands and looked at his notes, which were spread across the desk in a way that had organization she wasn't going to comment on but was clearly reading. He let her. She had a mind that moved quickly and he'd learned a long time ago that letting Astoria see things was worth more than being careful. "Gillyweed," she said, after a minute. "That was my first thought. It's the most reliable option if you can get it." "Neville knows plants better than anyone in the school," she said. "Ask him." "I was going to." She looked at him sideways. "And the other thing," she said. "The thing that isn't the task." He looked back. "Bartemius Crouch Jr., he said. "He's been living inside Moody's skin all year. Polyjuice potion. His father reported him dead in Azkaban years ago, but I think the death was faked. I think his mother's dying wish was to switch herself for him, to let him out." He spread the relevant documents, copies from Daphne's ministry contacts, a letter from Sirius who had intersected with Barty Crouch Sr. twice in professional contexts. "He's been guiding me toward the Triwizard Cup since September. Making sure I have the skills for each task. Setting me up to survive long enough to reach the cup." "Which is a port key," Astoria said. "Has to be. The binding contract guarantees the champion who touches it first is transported, that's the tournament's own magic." Someone modified the destination. "To where?" "Somewhere Voldemort is," Harry said. "He's building toward a ritual. He needs my blood, specifically, my blood, with the protection in it from my mother. He thinks if he uses my blood in the resurrection ritual he takes the protection with him, neutralizes it." Astoria was quiet for a moment. "Then, does he understand what the protection actually is?" Harry looked at her. "I mean specifically," she said. "What it's made of." "I've been reading the Greengrass family records on the compact, old magic, the kind that works through genuine sacrifice, and the thing your mother did, what she left in you, it's the same class of magic. It's not a shield. It's an anchor. If he uses your blood," she paused. "He doesn't neutralize it. He incorporates it. It becomes part of him." The implications of that arranged themselves in Harry's mind with the clean precision of something falling into place. "He'd carry the anchor," Harry said slowly. "Which means the protection would extend," to him, Astoria said. Specifically the aspect of it that prevents a killing curse from landing on its host. She met his eyes. He wouldn't be able to kill you after that. Not with that specific magic. He'd know that, Harry said. After the fact. When it didn't work. What do you want to do? She said. He looked at the notes for a long moment. Then he looked at her, at the dark eyes and the composed mouth and the specific quality of her attention that had always been, from the beginning, the kind of attention that saw what it was looking at. I want to let it happen, he said. The ritual. I want to be there. I want to see him come back. He paused. Because if I stop it now, he finds another way and I'm not there. But if I'm there, if he comes back exactly the way he's planned, with my blood, with the protection in him without knowing what it means, then when it doesn't work, when the killing curse fails, he'll know it's because of me and he won't know why, and that's the most dangerous version of Voldemort there is. Except, Astoria said steadily, that you'll be bound to a graveyard with his Death Eaters around you. Yes. And your plan for that part is, to not die, Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment with the expression she wore when she was deciding how to respond to something that required both honesty and the specific restraint of someone who cared about the answer. That is not a plan, she said. That's a preference. I'll fight my way out, he said. I'll bring Cedric. You can't guarantee. I can guarantee more than I could if I went in surprised, Harry said. I'll know the destination's been modified. I'll know who I'm going to find. I'll know what the ritual looks like because I've read everything Dumbledore has given me and a considerable amount he hasn't. And I'll have the compact. Astoria was very quiet. The compact protects you, she said, carefully. We've never tested the extent of it in, I know, Harry said. I'm not relying on it as a shield. But it's there. He looked at her. You chose me. The blood chose me. Whatever that means about what I carry, I'm going to trust it. She looked back at him for a long time. Then she said, quietly, come back. That's the plan, he said. I said it's not a plan. It's the part of the plan that matters most, he said. The lake was cold and the gillyweed worked exactly as described, and Neville had produced it from his personal stores with the straightforward generosity of someone for whom helping Harry with a potentially fatal task was simply the obvious thing to do. Harry spent an hour in the black water finding the person they'd taken, Ron, asleep and breathing water with the unconcerned competence of someone under an enchantment, and finding the other hostages too, because leaving them wasn't something he was built for. He surfaced with Ron and with Gabrielle Delacour, Fleur's younger sister, because Fleur hadn't come and he'd waited as long as the task parameters permitted and then gone back for her. He deposited them on the bank and pushed wet hair out of his face and looked at the judging panel. Dumbledore was smiling. He came second in points, behind Cedric, which was the right result. The task had been to retrieve what you'd miss most, and Cedric had done it fastest and with considerable skill, and Harry had done it more comprehensively and more slowly, and the judges had awarded it appropriately. Afterwards, Crumb found him near the dressing tent and said, without preamble, you went back for the others. Someone had to, Harry said. Delacour didn't come. You went back. It seemed like the obvious thing, Harry said. Crumb was quiet for a moment. There is a girl, he said. In your school. Granger. Harry looked at him. She is very. Crumb paused, clearly assembling the sentence with care. There are not many people who say what they think to me. She does. She does that with everyone, Harry said. It's one of her best qualities. I think so also, Crumb said. He paused again. I wanted to tell someone. I appreciate that, Harry said, with genuine warmth. Tell her. Crumb nodded, once, and walked away, and Harry thought that the strangest part of the tournament had been finding out that Victor Crumb was thoughtful and quiet and considerably less interesting as a celebrity than he was as a person, which was probably true of most people but was more visible when the celebrity in question was this famous. The maze arrived in June. Harry walked into it at the edge of night with the warmth in his chest very bright and very steady and the knowledge of what was waiting at the center, and he went through it the way he went through everything now, purposefully, without hesitation, without performing calm because he didn't need to perform it. The maze was alive in the way that Hogwarts itself was alive, enchanted and responsive, and things came at him in the dark. A boggart he reduced to smoke with a contemptuous flick, a blast-ended scrut he went around rather than through, a confundus charm emanating from a specific direction that felt too deliberate to be a maze feature. He followed the confundus charm back to its source and found Cedric standing very still with his wand lowered, his face blank. He reversed the enchantment and Cedric came back with a gasp and said, "What, someone inside the maze," Harry said. "Fake Moody. He's been in here." Cedric's eyes sharpened. "Trying to take me out. Or guide me," Harry said. "Same result either way." He turned back to the path. "Stay behind me." "I'm a champion," Cedric said. "You are," Harry said, "and you're also the person I told about the first task and I'm not going to feel good about what happens tonight if you're not in it." He looked at Cedric, direct and honest. "The cup is a portkey. The destination has been modified. When we reach it, we're going somewhere I've been preparing for. I want you there because I trust you and because 2 wands are better than 1, but I need you to know what you're agreeing to." Cedric stared at him. "You've known about this," Cedric said. "4 months, Harry said. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I needed to know I had the full picture first." A pause. The maze rustled around them, dark and breathing. Then Cedric said, "Tell me everything. Fast." Harry told him fast. They walked while he talked and Cedric's face moved through several stages and arrived at a set-jawed resolve that Harry had expected from him and was glad to see. "What do you need me to do?" Cedric said. "Don't let them circle me," Harry said. "When we land, they'll spread out. I need them in front of me. Can you hold my back?" "Yes," Cedric said, immediately. The cup was at the center of the maze, sitting on a pedestal of its own making, glowing faintly blue in the dark. Harry looked at it and felt the portkey magic in it, the modified destination humming underneath the tournament's binding. He reached out and took Cedric's wrist. "Hold on," he said. "Don't let go when we land." "I've got you," Cedric said. Harry grabbed the cup. The graveyard appeared all at once, gray headstones and dead grass and a darkness that had nothing to do with the time of day, the specific darkness of a place where something had decided to happen. Harry landed with Cedric and was moving before they'd fully stopped moving, pulling them both sideways behind the nearest headstone as a voice said kill the spare and a bolt of green light went exactly where they'd been standing. He felt Cedric flinch beside him and grabbed his arm. "I've got you," he said, echoing it back. "Stay down." Pettigrew, and it was Pettigrew, he knew the shape of him now, the gray fearful energy, was moving toward them across the graveyard with something in his arms, a bundle wrapped in dark cloth that Harry felt from 20 feet away like standing near a fire that burned cold. Voldemort. Not whole. Not yet. A shade, a construct, less than a ghost and more than a memory, something that had been building itself for years from scraps and borrowed life and the absolute refusal to accept its own ending. Harry felt the coldness of it and felt the warmth in his chest rise against it and thought, "I know you. I've been reading you, studying you, dismantling what you left behind. You don't know what you're about to take." They bound him to a headstone while Cedric, steady, following instructions, back against the stone and wand up, held the perimeter with a controlled ferocity that made Harry note he'd underestimated him. The ritual happened. Harry let it happen. Bone from the grave. Flesh from Pettigrew's arm. Blood from Harry's, where Pettigrew's knife cut, and Harry felt the warmth in his chest push outward through the cut like something being given willingly rather than taken, and that distinction mattered in ways that Voldemort's research hadn't accounted for. The cauldron blazed. And Tom Riddle rose. He was taller than Harry had imagined and more human-looking than the stories had suggested, which was somehow worse, a face that had been handsome once and had made itself into something else, white and sharp and carrying in it the shape of all the choices that had progressively replaced a person with a concept. He stood in the firelight and looked down at himself with the satisfaction of someone who had performed a difficult piece of work correctly. Then he looked at Harry. "Harry Potter," he said. The voice was cold and precise and carried the specific pleasure of someone reaching the end of a very long plan. "Shall we? You took my blood," Harry said. Voldemort stopped. "You used it in the ritual," Harry said. "My blood specifically. Because of the protection my mother left in it." He kept his voice level, conversational, the way he'd spoken to the diary in second year, the way he'd spoken to the basilisk, the way he'd learned that the right tone in a dangerous situation was always the one that refused to be defined by the situation's terms. "Do you understand what you took with it?" Something moved in the red eyes. Wariness, dressed as contempt. "You think a dead woman's charm, I think you did your research on the mechanics and missed the principle," Harry said. "The protection isn't a shield. It's an anchor. And now it's in your blood." A silence. "What does that mean?" Voldemort said, and underneath the cold precision there was something that wasn't quite there before, a fractional uncertainty, a crack in the absolute confidence of someone whose plans had always worked eventually. "It means the specific magic that stopped the killing curse from landing on me will now stop it from landing on the one who carries my blood," Harry said. "It means if you cast it at me right now, it won't work. Not because of anything I do. Because you gave yourself a protection that you don't know how to turn off." The Death Eaters who had assembled from the dark during the ritual stood in their circle, and the silence in the graveyard had a specific quality, the quality of people watching something that was supposed to be a coronation becoming something more complicated. Voldemort raised his wand. "Avada Kedavra," he said, and it hit Harry in the chest like a physical blow, and the warmth rose to meet it and the curse unraveled. Not reflected, not deflected, dissolved. Like putting a lit match into deep water. Harry stood there. Voldemort stared at him. "I told you," Harry said. The red eyes, and this was something Harry had not expected, this specific thing, showed fear. Not the performed grandiosity of someone who wanted others afraid. Actual fear, the thing at the bottom of everything Tom Riddle had ever done or become, the original engine of it, looking out from behind 50 years of ambition and cruelty and the absolute refusal to die. He was afraid of death. He had always been afraid of death. Everything he'd built, every choice that had made Tom Riddle into Lord Voldemort, had been the architecture of that one fear, an entire personality constructed around running from a single thing. Harry looked at him and felt something that wasn't pity. He wasn't built to pity this, not yet, maybe not ever, but something adjacent to understanding. The thing you felt when you saw the shape of a person clearly, even a person who had done what this person had done. "You could stop," Harry said. "That's not a negotiation. I know it won't work. But I want you to know that every step forward from here is something you chose." Voldemort's face contracted. "Kill him," he said, to the Death Eaters. And Harry moved. Cedric was already up behind him, wand blazing, and what followed was 4 minutes of the most efficient violence Harry had produced in his life, not elegant, not scripted, real and fast and brutal. He burned through Death Eaters on his left while Cedric held the right, and the warmth in his chest ran like floodwater through everything he did, amplifying, extending, making possible things that shouldn't have been possible for a 14-year-old. He sent Pettigrew into the headstone with a binding charm so forceful the stone cracked. He dropped 2 more Death Eaters with stunners thrown simultaneously from different wand angles, a technique he developed in the past year specifically because it was the kind of thing you needed and didn't know you needed until the moment arrived. Voldemort himself cast 6 spells in the next 40 seconds, and each one met the warmth in Harry's chest and came apart, and after the sixth one the red eyes went through something complicated and Harry could see him arriving at a conclusion. Not tonight, Harry thought at him, without speaking. You came back diminished and you know it now and you're going to need to think about that. Voldemort disappeared with a motion that wasn't quite apparition and wasn't quite anything Harry had a word for, like a flame going out, like something stepping through a door that closed behind it. The graveyard went very still. Harry stood in the quiet with Cedric beside him, both of them breathing hard, the night cold around them and the Death Eaters unconscious or fled and Pettigrew bound to his cracked headstone. He found the cup in the grass where it had fallen. He picked it up. He looked at Cedric. Okay? Alive, Cedric said. His voice was remarkably steady for someone who had spent the last 4 minutes fighting Death Eaters. You knew all of that was going to happen. Most of it, Harry said. Most of it, Cedric repeated. The part where the killing curse didn't work, I thought it might not, Harry said. I wasn't certain. Cedric looked at him with an expression that was half disbelief and half something that might eventually become awe but hadn't quite arrived yet. Harry, he said. I need you to understand that you are not a normal person. I know, Harry said. Sorry. Don't apologize, Cedric said, and almost laughed. Just, next time, more warning. Deal, Harry said, and held out the cup. Together? Cedric looked at the cup and then at him and then put his hand on it beside Harry's. They came back to the maze's center together, both of them standing, and the crowd's noise hit them like a wave and Harry looked out at the stands and found the faces he was looking for, Ron, white-faced and standing, Hermione with her hand over her mouth, Neville gripping the railing, Sirius, who had come to watch, standing very still with gray eyes that were already running the calculation of what they were seeing. And in the Slytherin section, Daphne, with the composed expression of someone who had been trusting a plan and watching it hold. Beside her, a first-year with dark eyes who was looking at him with an expression that Harry, across the distance and the noise and the night, could read completely. She gave him a nod. Small, precise. He nodded back. The aftermath was loud in the way that important things were loud, not the noise of chaos but the noise of implication, of people who had understood something and were starting to say it out loud. The ministry officials who arrived within the hour had the specific quality of people whose jobs had just become significantly more complicated. Fudge stood in the hospital wing where Harry had been deposited for observation and looked at him with the round, panicked eyes of a man watching the thing he'd refused to believe become visible and unavoidable. The Dark Lord is, you're saying he's, I'm saying what I saw, Harry said. I'm saying what Cedric saw. I'm saying what Pettigrew said under Veritaserum in the graveyard, which I asked Dumbledore to obtain before we came back, which I understand has been done. He met Fudge's eyes. He's back. He's weaker than before and he knows it and he's going to spend some time reassessing. But he's back, and what you do in the next month is going to determine what the next year looks like. The public, Fudge started. The public deserves to know, Harry said. Not because it's comfortable. Because they need to prepare. He kept his voice level, without particular force, the way he'd learned that the most effective version of this was never the one that pushed. Minister. He used a 14-year-old boy to come back. He couldn't kill me in the graveyard when he had every advantage. He arrived and he's already diminished. He paused. Tell the truth. You'll be glad you did. Fudge looked at him for a long moment with the expression of a man doing maths he didn't like. Then he looked at Dumbledore, who was standing in the corner of the room with the patience of someone who had said what he had to say and was waiting. I need to speak with my advisors, Fudge said. He left. Harry leaned back against the pillows and looked at the ceiling and felt the warmth in his chest quiet down from its operational mode to its resting state, like a fire banked back after hard use. Dumbledore came to sit beside the bed. You knew about the blood, Dumbledore said, quietly. The protection and what it would do in the ritual. I had a theory, Harry said. Astoria Greengrass worked it out. She's been reading the family records on old magic. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. She's a first year. She's sharp, Harry said. Another pause. Then, Harry. What you did in the graveyard, I'm going to need to know about all the remaining Horcruxes, Harry said. The ones you haven't told me about yet. Specifically the last one. He met the blue eyes. I think you know what the last one is. I think you've known for a while and you haven't said because you thought knowing would break something. It won't. Dumbledore looked at him across the small space between the chair and the bed, and Harry watched the old face do something that the old man worked very hard to never let it do in front of people. It went tired. Fully tired, the deep kind, the kind that had a specific shape when the thing making you tired was not sleep deprivation but the weight of knowing something you'd rather not know. Not tonight, Dumbledore said. But soon. Soon, Harry agreed. Cedric appeared at the door, released from his own examination down the hall, still in his tournament robes and looking like someone who had just processed a very large amount of information and was still running it. He looked at Harry and then at Dumbledore and then back at Harry and said, "I'm getting Madame Pomfrey to look at that arm." "It's fine," Harry said. "It's been fine all night while you did 17 other things with it," Cedric said. "Let someone actually check." He said it with the firmness of someone who had decided to cope with extraordinary events by insisting on ordinary processes, which Harry found he had nothing against. He let Madame Pomfrey look at his arm, which required minimal treatment, and sat in the hospital wing while the castle around him processed the night, and thought about what Astoria had said in the classroom. "Come back. That's the plan." "I said it's not a plan. It's the part that matters most." He was back. He was here. The plan had worked, mostly, which was all plans ever did. Voldemort was alive and diminished and afraid in a way that was going to make him more dangerous before it made him less. There were still Horcruxes. There was still Dumbledore's careful, weighted not tonight and whatever it contained. There was more to do. There was always more to do. He accepted this without drama, the way he accepted everything that was simply true about his life, and he lay back in the hospital wing bed while Cedric sat in the visitor's chair and the castle settled around him and the warmth in his chest ran its steady light. Outside, the Hogwarts grounds were dark and quiet. Somewhere in them, the lake was still. The castle's windows glowed. 5 years of it. And at the end of the hallway Dumbledore was composing a statement for the Daily Prophet and Fudge was calling his advisors, and somewhere in England a diminished dark wizard was sitting with a piece of knowledge he didn't know what to do with, which was that the thing he'd built his whole existence around, the fear of ending, was sitting inside his own blood now, tied to the boy he couldn't kill. Harry thought about that. About the shape of it. About what it meant for the road ahead. He thought, good. He closed his eyes, and for the third time in his life, the first time the crack sealed, the second time in Sirius's hospital room, he slept without the need to listen for anything. The night held.